not sure what kind of person that makes me in this moment, because reading this is wrong on so many levels, but it isn't as wrong as crossing that line with him physically would be. I can't have him in real life, but I can learn what he's like in bed to aid in all my fantasies I'm probably going to have about him. Stop it. Lowen is the villain. This is even worse reading it the second time around. Oh, this is creepy, stop it. Hi everyone, and welcome back to another video. If you don't know me, my name is Rachel, and this gorgeous little girl is Kyra. You wanna say hi, baby bean? Oh, you wanna say hi? You just wanna snuggle, don't you? Mwah. Good girl. Today, we're talking about Colleen Hoover. And Colleen Hoover books really are something, aren't they? Yes, they are. I feel like Colleen Hoover books are kind of everywhere at the minute, and I vaguely remember reading at least one of her books, or like one of her weird series of books or something like that a couple of years ago. But now I feel like she's grown in popularity even more. She's quite big on TikTok, I think. And then a couple of months ago, my sister came to me and she's like, oh, I've got some book recommendations for you, blah, blah. One of them is Verity by Colleen Hoover. You just have to read it. And I was like, oh, okay. Intrigued. So it kind of got put on my maybe pile, and then recently I've also been doing some editing for Alizée. If you don't know her channel, she's wonderful, please go check her out. And one of the last videos I edited for her was her review of Colleen Hoover's book Layla. And as I was watching this video and like reading bits of the book and stuff like that, so I was going on and doing the editing, I realised that Colleen Hoover's writing was way worse than I ever remembered it being. I was like, okay, I don't remember her being a good writer, but I think at least she's kind of catchy, if you want to put it like that. It's like her writing's quick to get through, the stories move at a very fast pace, all of that stuff. The thing is, Verity is one of these books that always kind of tops the list of the best Colleen Hoover books out there. People really rave about this book, they really like it, so I was like, okay, if I'm gonna dive back into the world of Colleen Hoover, why not read this one first? Seems as good a place as any to start, right? And I figured, if I was gonna be putting myself through this, why not make a video out of it? Because it's what I do. To give you a very brief overview / conclusion of what I thought of the book. This book is nowhere near as bad as most of the books that I do review here on this channel. There's nothing overtly like horrific about it. It's not overtly racist or homophobic or transphobic or anything like that. It is a bit sexist in places, I think. It's not the best written book, but overall my conclusion is it's just kind of dumb. It's just a really dumb book. So the point of making this video isn't to be like a, ooh, this book is so awful, let's burn it. And it's absolutely not to judge anyone who did actually like this book. It's just sometimes I want to cover lighter books that are a bit bad but not too serious and have a bit of a giggle at it. And that's what we're going to be doing today. We're going to be having a giggle at some poor writing by Colleen Hoover. So this book is kind of one of Colleen's thrillers, but it also has the romance elements that she's kind of famous and well known for. And this book opens with our main character and narrator witnessing a brutal death. A man steps out in front of a truck and is just immediately crushed in front of her. She gets sprayed with his blood. It's pretty gross, I'll be honest. It's quite shocking. It's not a bad opener as opening scenes in books go, although the writing is kind of filled with cliches which do take me out of the story just a bit. For example, I closed my eyes before his head went under the tyre, and I heard it pop like the cork of a champagne bottle. I only have to look down at my once white shirt, at the blood now splattered across it, to know that a hearse would serve him better than an ambulance. The crosswalk sign now says, walk, and the thick crowd takes heed, making it impossible for me to swim upstream in this Manhattan river. Then there's a typical bit of Colleen Hoover angst where this narrator turns this absolute tragedy into an event that is all about her. Because of course it is, right? As much as the indifference in some of the people here disturbs me, it's exactly why I moved to this city 10 years ago. People like me belong in overpopulated cities. The state of my life is irrelevant in a place this size. There are far more people here with stories much more pitiful than mine. Here, I'm invisible. Unimportant. Manhattan is too crowded to give a stuff about me, and I love her for it. Why do all Colleen Hoover's characters have the same voice? This is one of my biggest gripes that I've found so far. I feel like with the tone Colleen puts into literally all of her writing that I've read so far, so not just this book, not just one I read forever ago, not just books like Layla that I've like read bits of as well, but I feel like Colleen could be writing modern day melodrama if she just had a little more self-awareness about herself, but I think she takes her writing a little too seriously. And we just get this weird mix of like melodrama trying to be serious and people taking it seriously when really it's like swimming upstream in the Manhattan River, you know? Anyway. The other thing is, I really thought something about this opening scene would come back later, a sort of full circle thing, a Chekhov's gun, if you will. I thought there would be like, this opening scene would be a similar way to how someone died later on, or we'd have something revealed about it, but no, it literally serves no long-term purpose in the story, which is a little frustrating. I moved to this city to be invisible, but I'm certainly not impenetrable. It's something I've been working on, attempting to become as hardened as the concrete beneath my feet. It hasn't been working out so well. I can feel everything I just witnessed settling in my stomach. Okay, drinking game if you want to play along during this video. Take a shot every time Colleen Hoover uses an overdone cliche. I'll be drinking Monster throughout this because I am exhausted and it's late at night and I need some caffeine, but please feel free to drink anything you want. Have some water, an orange juice, vodka, wine, whiskey, beer. But if you are drinking alcohol, please drink responsibly and don't take a shot for every cliche because you will die. Maybe like half a sip for each one and spread this video out over like 2 days, yeah? We don't want anyone dying of alcohol poisoning here. And trust me, it could happen. So our narrator finds herself covered in this man's blood, so some guy takes her into a nearby cafe to help her get cleaned up in the men's bathroom, and we learn this woman is traumatized from something in her past, which I thought there was going to be this huge reveal about this later on. It's going to be something shocking and dramatic and disturbing, and really it's barely anything. Not to spoil it, but this is so anticlimactic. The man hands me wet paper towels, and I wipe at my face while he wets another handful. I can smell the blood now. The tanginess in the air sends my mind whirling back to when I was 10. The smell of blood was strong enough to remember it all these years later. Yeah, because no woman knows the smell of blood for any other reason, does she? As she attempts to scrub the blood from her shirt, she, of course, worries about her appearance around this stranger who happens to be muscular and taller than her. He heads to the door, but instead of giving me privacy while I stand here in my least attractive bra, he locks us inside the bathroom, so no one will walk in on me while I'm shirtless. I inspect my hair next, turning left to right in the mirror, but only find an inch of dark roots above fading caramel. I grip the sink and stare back at my reflection. 2 tired, empty eyes stare back at me. The horror of what they've just witnessed have darkened the hazel to a murky brown. I rub my cheeks with the heels of my hand to inspire colour to no avail. I look like death. Seems a bit insensitive considering man's just died, but okay. Also, if we're drinking for every cliche in that, down your drink, mate. The man I assumed at this point would go on to be our love interest, and I was right, but I have feelings about him, which we will discuss as the book goes on. I was a bit dubious at this point though, because we all know how well relationships based on shared trauma go, right? Well, they go just about as well as any other Colleen Hoover relationship, so not really saying much, is it? His eyes match the tie he just shoved in his pocket. Chartreuse. He's handsome, but there's something about him that makes me think he wishes he weren't. Almost as if his looks might be an inconvenience to him. A part of him he doesn't want anyone else to notice. He wants to be invisible in this city, just like me. Most people come to New York to be discovered. The rest of us come here to hide. 3 pages into this book and she can see into his soul. They're just meant to be, or something like that. We find out here that our narrator is called Lowen, which I'm almost certainly is pronounced Lowen and not just Lowen. I think it's Lowen. Although it would be funnier if it was Lowen. In my head I keep wanting to call it Lowen. Anyway, this dream guy is Jeremy. Isn't that just the sexiest name ever? Jeremy. Jeremy used to work in real estate, which, you know, all of that is surprisingly normal compared to some of the love interests in Colleen Hoover's book. Just like in Layla, where the main love interest was called Leeds. Leeds! And she makes a point of him actually being like, yeah, I was named after the city in the UK. I live in Leeds. It's not a sexy place. Anyway, Jeremy leads all these sexy, sexy men. So Lowen and Jeremy bond over more trauma, of course, because that's how most Colleen Hoover relationships start. And he tells her, I pulled my 8-year-old daughter's body out of a lake 5 months ago. He leans against the counter like this is a conversation he's ready for. A conversation he's been waiting for. Someone to come along and make his tragedy seem less tragic. It's what you do when you've experienced the worst of the worst. You seek out people like you. People worse off than you. And you use them to make yourself feel better about the terrible things that have happened to you. I swallow before I speak because my tragedies are nothing compared to his. I think of the most recent one. embarrassed to speak it out loud because it seems so insignificant compared to his. My mother died last week. I didn't realise how repetitive that little bit was until I just read it out now. It's poor writing. Poor writing. He doesn't react to my tragedy like I reacted to his. He doesn't react at all. And I wonder if it's because he was hoping mine was worse. It isn't. He wins. What a pair of well-adjusted people who definitely don't need therapy at all, right? It gets super awkward. They leave the bathroom. She goes on about how altruistic Jeremy is, but ooh, he's wearing a wedding ring. Never mind. We turn out that Al Lowen is a writer with what I thought was like a morphine addiction, it seems, because of this passage. But this is never addressed again. Apparently she's just craving morphine as a one-off thing, and then it never comes up again. There we go, okay. In chapter 2, we find out that Lowen used to sleep with her editor, but called it off because he was too focused on work, and then gets mad when he texts her just about work and doesn't ask about her personal life at all, like this is some sort of a shock. She was like, I don't want to see you, you're too focused on work, let's just keep this professional. And he's like, okay, goes on to be professional, and she's like, oh, what? Shocking, why is this happening? Come on. I don't know, the whole way this is written sounds like a teenager, not a grown adult. I think Lowen's meant to be like 28 or something, and I'm like, mate, grow up, please. You're not 14 anymore, stop acting like it. He didn't even ask about my mum in the text. I wasn't surprised. His lack of interest in anything other than his job and himself are the reasons we're no longer together. His lack of concern for me made me feel unjustly irritated. He doesn't owe me anything, but he could have at least acted like he cared. We find out that Lowen is clearly a healthy, well-adjusted adult who definitely doesn't need a lot of therapy because it's hard to say why I have such a deeply crippling aversion to other humans, but if I had to wager a bet, I'd say it's a direct result of my own mother being terrified of me. Again, I thought this trauma with her mum was going to come back into play later in the book and play more of a part, but it just doesn't. It's told to us here, and then that's it. Like, it doesn't play a part in her character development later, it doesn't play a part in the plot later, it's never really brought up again in any meaningful way, and I'm just like, what's the point? Anyway, terrified may be a strong word, but she certainly didn't trust me as a child. She kept me fairly secluded from people outside of school because she was afraid of what I might be capable of during my many sleepwalking episodes. That paranoia bled into my adulthood, and by then I was set in my ways. A loner, very few friends and not much of a social life, which is why this morning is the first morning I've left my apartment since weeks before she passed away. Like, honestly, these can be quite serious issues, this whole, like, parental trauma thing, even though the reasons for it are just odd and barely there and barely discussed in this book. This whole agoraphobia and being unable to leave the house thing, again, serious issue. It's something that I definitely struggle with myself. You know, I have, like, bouts where I can't leave the house for long periods of time and stuff like that. And I feel like these are things which can be addressed in an interesting way in thrillers and in other books, but I just feel like maybe Colleen Hoover isn't the right person to address these because of the problems she's had with her writing before, especially when it comes to her romanticizing and glamorizing a lot of abusive relationships. But honestly, the way she brings up these things here, and then she's like, oh, these are super serious, and then just doesn't bother to address them or bring them up anymore, is just bizarre. Like, we're told here Lowen is agoraphobic, but then it doesn't play a part in the rest of the plot. Why? Why make her agoraphobic if it's not going to impact her life at all, if it's not going to impact the plot at all, if it's not going to impede her or show us some character development, if it's not something for her to overcome? What's really the point of it? I don't know, it feels silly. It feels very silly. Anyway, so Lowen's on the way to this meeting in her publisher's building. Jeremy turns up again in the same building, and Lowen wonders if he's following her, which of course is the most sensible assumption, right? Because it couldn't possibly just be that he had business in the same very large central New York building. And if you're both in the same bit of New York, outside your publisher's office, yeah, you're going to see each other on the street and in the building, right? Anyway, she's like, oh my god, is he following me? No, he wasn't. I'll tell you that now. They chat a little bit and he starts Googling her right there and then in front of her, and it turns out that Lowen's meeting is actually with him. Oh my god, again, it's like they're meant to be together. Fate and something. Except, yeah, he's literally married, so you're trying to make this happen with a married man. I can't really get behind that. And he literally mentions his wife, who is also a writer, and yeah. At the revelation of their meeting being together, Lowen thinks, I finally get that smile, and as gorgeous as it is, I don't want it anymore. I don't know him at all, nor do I know how he relates to the meeting I'm about to have, but even without being privy to any details of what's happening this morning, I can't help but like the guy. The man literally gave me the shirt off his back, so I doubt he has a vindictive nature. Jeremy then disappears off. Her editor Corey, the one she used to sleep with, shows up, and turns out he gave her the wrong meeting time because she's always late, like such a silly, quirky girl. You're always late to everything, so better give you the wrong meeting time like you're a child. But yeah, then we get this odd exchange of he hasn't changed, still very clean, groomed, wearing a tie, glasses, a smile, always such a stark contrast to myself. You look terrible, I say, because he doesn't look terrible. He never does, and he knows it. You look refreshed and ravishing, he says, because I never look refreshed and ravishing. I always look tired, maybe even perpetually bored. I've heard of resting bitch face, but I relate more to resting bored face. Oh, so quirky, not like the other girls, not all put together. Ooh, she's always bored. Ooh, she's... But the men can't help but fall for her. I also thought, because Corey was introduced so, strongly early on in this plot, that he would have a role to play later on. But after something like the 3rd or 4th chapter, he's just not mentioned again. He does nothing else in the entire book. I don't get why we're getting all of this about him and his backstory and their relationship and everything, because nothing ever happens with him. He's just a non-character. It's like Colleen forgets she ever wrote him. Does she plan these books out beforehand? Because it really doesn't seem that way. Then there's this revelation that her mother, before she died, was this liar who insisted on living in a fancy apartment that Lowen couldn't really afford, and how now she's got Lowen in a bunch of debt and money trouble, and so, ooh, she's gonna have to take any work she can get. This is like a vaguely relevant plot point because it sets into motion the rest of the story, in that it's the reason she takes on the job that she does in the rest of the book. But again, once that little thing's happened, it's just never mentioned again. It's not brought up anymore. It's barely relevant. So again, annoys me a little bit. There's also this reveal about her past relationship with Corey. Apparently when they were together, he was in love with who he thought she was based on a character she wrote in a book, not in love with the real her, and that's one of the other reasons why it didn't work out. Not just because he was focused on work, like we were told earlier, but because he liked the idea of her and this fictional version of her that he'd kind of projected onto her based on her writing rather than who she actually was. I'm sure lots of us have been in a similar situation and it's never good. I'm actually kind of impressed with Colleen Hoover for recognising how messed up this was and not romanticising a situation like this for once. Brilliant. But it's kind of ruined with more self-deprecating moaning from our main character when she goes on about how great the men in her life are, even when they aren't. So she says, Corey clicks his pen and straightens in his chair as though he's cocking a gun for battle. Let me do the talking. I plan to anyway. He's charismatic and charming. I'd be hard-pressed to find someone who could categorise me as either of those things. It's best if I just sit back and listen. Again, we're told Corey is charismatic and charming. Why not just show us that he is instead? Because his character never comes across as that way in the couple of scenes that he's in. Same with Jeremy. We're always told, oh, he's so altruistic, he's so kind, he's so charming, yet we never really see that. Sure, he gives her a shirt in the first scene, but I don't know, I feel like if most of us had just witnessed a death and were covered in a person's blood, or we'd just seen someone who'd done that, we'd also help them out by helping clean them up. I don't know, it just doesn't seem like that big of a thing. Anyway, point is, Colleen does a lot of telling and not showing, as opposed to showing and telling like a good writer does, you know? Corey, being charismatic and charming, then mocks her to her face for the borrowed shirt she's wearing, and Lowen says, such an ass, but he's good in bed, like most assholes. Just kind of feels a bit unnecessary, and again, it's this romanticization of douchey, abusive guys, like in most of Colleen Hoover's books. The meeting then starts and we get this event that, or we're told what's happening that springboards the rest of the plot. The rest of this book happens because of this meeting, right? Turns out, Jeremy's wife is this big fancy author called Verity Crawford, who is unable to finish her current series of books that are like proper popular massive bestsellers. I guessed at this point probably due to her kid dying, but apparently no. She was in a car accident that means she can't write anymore, so they need another author to step in and help finish the series. That's where Lowen comes in. Problem is, the job also involves things like doing promo and book signings, which Lowen doesn't want to do because it means being around people, so despite them offering a lot of money to her, she wants to decline for this reason. But we all know that won't happen, because if it doesn't, what's the rest of the book? Of course she takes the offer. But only after Jeremy and Lowen speak alone, and there's more angsty. Maybe it's because I'm sitting now, and he's so tall, but I don't remember feeling this small in his presence earlier. Knowing he's married to Verity Crawford makes me feel intimidated by him even more than when I was standing in front of him in my skirt and bra. Then it's Jeremy's turn to get all angsty. Have you ever heard of people referred to as chronics? He asks. I shake my head. I think Verity might have made up the term. After our daughters died, she said we were chronics, prone to chronic tragedy, one terrible thing after another. I stare at him a moment, allowing his words to percolate. He said he'd lost a daughter earlier, but he's using the term in plural form. Daughters? He inhales a breath, releases it with defeat. Yeah. Twins. We lost Shastin 6 months before Harper passed. It's been... He's detaching himself from his emotions as well as he was earlier. He runs a hand down his face, then returns to his chair. Some families are lucky enough to never experience a single tragedy, but then there are those families that seem to have tragedies waiting on the back burner. What can go wrong, goes wrong, and then it gets worse. He then tries to convince Lowen to take the job by telling her, the lawyer is lowballing you, tell your agent to ask for $500,000, tell them you'll do it with no press, under a pen name with an ironclad non-disclosure. That way, whatever it is you're trying to hide can stay hidden. Again, I keep thinking this hidden thing is going to come back in some way in the story later on. It doesn't. It just doesn't. Anyway. He also tells her that writing the books will also involve, you'll need to spend time in Verity's office going through her things. She has years of notes and outlines, stuff I wouldn't know how to make sense of. This does come back and influences the plot, so at least that's one thing. And he also tells her that they picked her because even though it wasn't a commercial success, Lowen wrote a novel that was/is one of Verity's favourites. This kind of comes back later, but it's a very small point, and yeah, it will come back. Okay. So at this point I was like, is anyone else getting the impression that Verity is dead or in a coma or just out of it? And here's what I thought was going to happen at this point. I was like, Verity's in a coma, Lowen's going to start getting creepy and take over her life, starting with going through her office, living in her house, sleeping with her husband, and probably like wearing her clothes at some point after some, oops, I'm so clumsy and spilled something down my dress incident. You have no idea how close I was to being exactly right. Colleen Hoover, you're predictable. Chapter 3 opens with some weird kink shaming for literally no good reason. And again, I thought this was going to come back at some point, but it just doesn't. Again, there's no point to her telling this. I had a boyfriend in my early 20s named Amos who liked being choked. It's why we broke up, because I refused to choke him. But sometimes I wonder where I'd be had I entertained his urge. Would we be married now? Would we have children? Would he have moved on to even more dangerous sexual perversions? I think that's what worried me the most with him. In your early 20s, vanilla sex should satisfy a person without the need to introduce fetishes so early on in a relationship. I like to think about Amos when I find myself disappointed with the current state of my life. As I stare at the pink eviction notice in Corey's hand, I remind myself that it could be worse. I could still be with Amos. The whole point in telling that story was just so she can introduce the fact that she's being evicted from her apartment because of the whole money trouble thing. You could have told us that anyway without all the weird kink shaming thing. Like, seriously, if you're not into it and you're not sexually compatible with someone, absolutely fine. If you don't have the same kinks as a partner, you don't have to indulge in them. You can break up. Not a problem at all. But all this crap about in your early 20s, vanilla sex should satisfy a person. His weird perversions, it's not okay. It's judgmental. It's rude for the sake of it. It's just shaming someone for the sake of it. Like, Colleen, you've literally written like 20 books romanticising abuse in various different ways and been like, oh, he's only rude to me because he loves me. Oh, he's only controlling me because he loves me. Who are you to really judge what people get off on? You're going to be like, oh, abuse is fine and romantic, but a little bit of consensual choking, that's too far. This all feels like a pointless segue into us finding out Lowen's getting evicted. Corey is at her flat to celebrate the book deal. Seems like he's trying to sleep with her again until she shuts him down because he has a girlfriend. And he switches to, out of nowhere, Jeremy seems dangerous. Think he killed his family? And he tells her that, like, he's not comfortable with her going to stay there and looking through Verity's notes because he's like, what if Jeremy's dangerous? What if? Although, honestly, it comes across more as jealousy than actual concern and worry. But I think this is meant to put, like, make us start doubting Jeremy and being like, oh, well, did he kill his family? But then, like, Corey's concerns never come up again. He's never actually heard from again. Well, I think he sends like a text or two being like, hey, sending me the chapters yet? But other than that, he does nothing else for the entire book. His concern doesn't come back. He doesn't check up on Lowen. He doesn't do... He just disappears after this scene. That's it. Never heard from again. He does nothing to further the plot in any way. Even these doubts he's trying to sow here, nothing really comes of it. Because, like, there have been these moments so far, like this with Corey, and earlier when Lowen was like, is he following me? Where it seems like Colleen's trying to make it seem like Jeremy is supposed to be this big, bad, dangerous guy that we're afraid of, but also drawn to because he's so hot. But, honestly, let's be real, he's not actually done anything suspicious so far in this entire book. All we know of him is he's really tall, and his daughter's died a while back. That neither makes me wary of him or lustful for him, you know? Luckily, Lowen addresses this with, I'm not ignorant. I've been digging up as much as I can find about them online. Their first child was at a sleepover 15 miles away when she had an allergic reaction. Neither Jeremy nor Verity were there when it happened. And the second daughter drowned in the lake behind their home, and Jeremy didn't arrive home until the search for her body was already in place. Both were ruled accidents. I can see why Corey is concerned, because I was too, honestly. But the more I dig, the less I can find to be concerned about. 2 tragic, unrelated accidents. And what about Verity's car wreck? It was an accident, I say. She hit a tree. Corey's expression suggests he isn't convinced. I read there weren't any skid marks, which means she either fell asleep at the wheel or did it on purpose. Can you blame her? I'm irritated that he's making baseless claims. I turn around to finish the dishes. She lost both of her daughters. Anyone who suffers through something like that would want to find a way out. Then Corey leaves. End of chapter. That was like 4 pages longer than it should have been, and it was only 5 pages long anyway. It was a bit of a waste of time, to be honest. Stupid. This is where any suspicion of Jeremy being a bad guy just ends and is forgotten about for the entire rest of the book. It's like Colleen spent a little bit of time setting this up and then thought, nah, not gonna do that actually. Moving on. What is the point? Chapter 4, and Lowen drives to Verity's house/office while listening to the audiobook of her first novel. She says, it just ended. My knuckles are white from gripping the steering wheel so tightly. My mouth is parched from forgetting to hydrate on the drive over. My self-esteem is somewhere back in Albany. She's good. Really good. Now I'm regretting having signed the contract. I'm not sure I can live up to that, and to think she's already written 6 of these novels, all from the villain's point of view. How can one brain hold that much creativity? There's more imposter syndrome stuff, which, again, could be relatable in the right circumstances and could make for a really interesting part of the book. But honestly, it just comes across as kind of like a faux, modest, awkward teenager. Like she says, I stick it out because thinking I'm not good enough is part of the writing process. It's part of mine anyway. For me, there are 3 steps to completing each of my books. 1. Start the book and hate everything I write. 2. Keep writing the book despite hating everything I write. 3. Finish the book and pretend I'm happy with it. There's never a point in my writing process where I feel like I've accomplished what I set out to accomplish, or when I believe I've written something everyone needs to read. Most of the time, I cry in my shower and stare at my computer screen like a zombie, wondering how so many authors can promote their books with so much confidence. I feel like it should be nice to have a narrator who's modest and vulnerable and feels insecurities like this like the rest of us, but honestly, so far I don't get what's likeable or compelling about Lowen as a character. I don't really get what makes her unique or interesting or, again, likeable, you know? I'm not all that interested in her background. I find myself with so little sympathy for her, even though on paper I should be relating to all of her struggles with, like, her mum, her creativity, you know, her insecurities around that stuff, all that. I should be relating to that. In reality, I just don't care about her, and I didn't throughout this entire book. And by the end of it, I absolutely despised her. And I wonder, like, is the writing to blame, maybe? I don't know. I also thought, okay, she's dealing with imposter syndrome. We'll see this throughout the book as she struggles to kind of, like, live up to Verity and live up to her accomplishments and all this stuff. We'll see her struggling with the writing. No, none of that. Literally, once she starts writing, this just isn't really addressed again. There's none of these struggles, there's none of this living up to Verity. I'm trying not to give away stuff. It's just, all of this is wasted potential for what could have been interesting, and it's just, No. I wrote in my notes here, we're 13% of the way into the book and I can't actually think of one nice thing Lowen's done. Not one kind thing she said about someone that wasn't related to her wanting to have sex with them. Not one selfless thing she's done. And looking back at the entire book, now I've read it all, I still don't see it. I can't actually think of one nice thing she does in the book. But also, like, on top of all this, can we also talk about how weird it is that she agreed to do this and write these books without ever having read the book she's just agreed to finish the series on? Like, she barely even knows what they're about, she doesn't know any of the plot points, she doesn't know the characters, she doesn't know the style she was writing in until she listened to this audiobook, yet she took on the project. It feels unprofessional and unrealistic to me. It's like saying to someone, hey, there are however many books in the Game of Thrones series, you know, like A Song of Ice and Fire. Do you want to finish writing them? And someone's like, yeah, absolutely, sure. What are they about? Do you know what I mean? You wouldn't. You wouldn't. So Lowen arrives at the house and guys, get your drinks ready again for more cliches. I tell myself not to freak out, even as I notice that the repetitive pattern on top of the iron gate resembles spiderwebs. I shiver as I follow a curve, the trees getting denser and taller until the house comes into view. I spot the roof first as I climb the hill. Slate grey, like an angry storm cloud. See, this is why you can't have alcohol with this game. It will kill you. Seconds later, the rest of it appears, and my breath snags in my throat. Dark stone works its way across the front of the house, broken only by the blood-red door, the only relief of colour in this sea of grey. Ivy covers the left side of the house, but instead of charming, it's threatening, like a slow-moving cancer. Down your drinks, guys. Down them now. I do get what Colleen Hoover's trying to do here. She wants to build an atmosphere. This is meant to be a thriller after all. She's trying to make this fancy, expensive house seem creepy, make the whole experience of arriving ominous. But with lines like grey like an angry storm cloud, I can't help but be taken out of this whole scene and find it the opposite of ominous and creepy, because this reads like a first-time writer's first draft. Decent, but they haven't quite put the time or effort in yet. Not something that apparently the best book of a best-selling author should be writing. It's full of cliches, it's just a bit basic, there's no unique tone of voice, it's just very mundane. Now, I felt like maybe I was being too harsh here, so I was like, you know what, actually, let's compare this passage to some other descriptions of creepy houses from more established authors, from more well-known books, from books which actually get that creepy, ominous atmosphere right. I want you to listen to these and listen to the syntax, how the varied sentence lengths set the pace and add to this sense of eeriness. Notice when the authors choose to use metaphors and when they don't. Listen to the difference in the overall tone of these passages, and you'll see what I mean between an average author and a really, really good author. So this first paragraph is from Shirley Jackson's The Haunting of Hill House. Wonderful, fantastic, eerie, dark, creepy. Listen to this. And this is the very, very first paragraph of the story, so it really, really sets the tone for everything that's to come. No live organism can continue for long to exist sanely under conditions of absolute reality. Even larks and katydids are supposed by some to dream. Hill House, not sane, stood by itself against its hills, holding darkness within. It had stood so for 80 years and might stand for 80 more. Within, walls continued upright, bricks met neatly, floors were firm, and doors were sensibly shut. Silence lay steadily against the wood and stone of Hill House, and whatever walked there, walked alone. Or, take a very different but equally beautiful example from Angela Carter's short story The Bloody Chamber, which is a retelling of the story of Bluebeard. And The Bloody Chamber is one of my favourite short story collections of all time. Angela Carter is an absolute genius. It's a wonderful, brilliant collection, and this is the title story from it. And in this scene, our narrator is coming across her now husband's castle home for the first time, and this is where she is going to die. She's going to meet her end, and obviously she doesn't know this, but it's meant to set up this ominous setting, this dangerous place, you know? But also, this woman's naive. She's young. She's been taken advantage of by this man. And so she doesn't quite realise the danger she's entering into yet, you know? And his castle. The fairy solitude of the place, with its turrets of misty blue, its courtyard, its spiked gate. His castle that lay on the very bosom of the sea, with seabirds mewing about its attics. The casements opening onto the green and purple. Evanescent departures of the ocean, cut off by the tide from land for half a day. That castle, at home neither on the land nor on the water, a mysterious amphibious place, contravening the materiality of both earth and the waves, with the melancholy of the mermaiden who perches on her rock and waits endlessly for a lover who had drowned far away long ago. That lovely, sad sea siren of a place. And finally, let's take a look at the absolute legend, which is Edgar Allan Poe. You know he's one of my favourites, and this is from his story, The Fall of the House of Usher. I looked upon the scene before me, upon the mere house and the simple landscape features of the domain, upon the bleak walls, upon the vacant eye-like windows, upon the few rank sedges, and upon a few white trunks of decayed trees, with an utter depression of the soul which I can compare to no earthly sensation more properly than to the after-dream reveller upon opium. The bitter lapse into everyday life, the hideous dropping off of the veil. There was an iciness, a sinking, a sickening of the heart, an unredeeming dreariness of thought which no goading of the imagination could torture into aught of the sublime. What was it? I paused to think. What was it that so unnerved me in the contemplation of the House of Usher? It was a mystery all insoluble, nor could I grapple with the shadowy fancies that crowded upon me as I pondered. So 3 very different passages there in very different styles by 3 very different writers, all describing quite ominous houses and buildings, right? I'm not going to over-explain this because, I mean, I could go on about this for hours, but I'm just going to kind of leave it there and let you kind of think about this from yourselves. What was it that gave these 3 writers such unique tones of voice? What was it in their writing that set this dark, ominous, creepy atmosphere? And what was it that was lacking in Colleen Hoover's grey like an angry storm cloud, iron gate resembling spiderwebs? What was missing in that just didn't create an eerie atmosphere? Just have a think about it for yourself. All in all, yeah, Colleen Hoover's I Tell Myself Not to Freak Out might not be that bad compared to some of her other writing, but when we compare it to the work of masters who actually managed to capture the feelings of dread and uncertainty and create that ominous, creepy atmosphere, it just really doesn't hold up, does it? Yeah, it's a shame. I think when I've made comparisons like this before, some people say they're unfair comparisons, but to that I have to say, why? They're all pieces of writing attempting to elicit similar feelings in the reader, only some are more competent than others. All are bestsellers. Why shouldn't we compare them to understand different skill levels? It's not like the stuff from Colleen Hoover is a kid in school who's writing for fun. This is a woman who's selling her work to audiences, to mass audiences, and trying to elicit the same feelings as these other authors, who are also selling to mass audiences and trying to elicit those feelings. It's just one of them is better at it than the other, so why shouldn't we compare them to learn about language and good writing? That said, I'm also aware that there is a place and an audience for Colleen's writing. Hers is more accessible, it's easier to read when you don't want to think and you just kind of want to be told, oh, this house is scary, then yeah, her writing does have a place, but that still doesn't necessarily make it good writing. You know? It's like, compare Poundland crayons to Caran d'Ache oil pastels, you know? We're talking £1 a box versus 300 and odd pound for a collection. Each have their place. These serve a certain audience and purpose, and these serve a certain audience and purpose. But you can't tell me that these are as good quality as these, because they simply objectively aren't. That said, just as you wouldn't give the expensive oil pastels to a child in a nursery and tell them to colour with them, you wouldn't necessarily, necessarily want to read complex writing, maybe on a beach if you're just getting into reading. Does that make sense? So, like I say, I think we can acknowledge that Colleen Hoover's writing has a place and an audience and a purpose, and it fulfills a certain role, but that doesn't make it good writing. But do you know what I mean? It's hard. When I talk about things like this, sometimes people say I'm being elitist, but I'm like, no, I still think you can enjoy something while acknowledging that it's not good quality, you know? Anyway, not the point, that was a bit of a tangent, back to the book. Lowen is just arriving at the house, the $3 million mansion. That's relatable. Colleen Hoover attempts a really, really poor jump scare that just... why? I reach to the passenger seat to grab my phone so I can text Corey to let him know I made it. When I put my hand on the driver's side door handle, I stiffen, stretching my spine against the back seat. I turn and look out my window. Sweary words. What the F? I slap my chest to make sure I still have a heartbeat as I stare back at the face staring into my car window. Then, when I see that the figure at my door is only a child, I cover my mouth, hoping he's heard his fair share of curse words. He doesn't laugh, he just stares, which seems even creepier than if he'd scared me on purpose. Creepy kids are some of the creepiest things in horror to me, but this just left me feeling indifferent, not creeped out at all. I also noticed that, from this I thought, oh, Colleen's gonna make it a thing where, like, maybe this is an evil child, maybe there's something wrong with the kids, maybe he killed his sisters, maybe something, and there's like a couple of other incidents like that, where I thought, oh, that could be an interesting twist at the end. The kid's but no, the kid isn't evil. She does nothing with this plot point. She doesn't even address it. It just... so I wasn't creeped out by the kid, but I was creeped out by how Colleen writes about Lowen's behaviour. Now, I am an anxious person myself. I like to check things before I do them. I need to know things like public transport routes before I go anywhere. I need to plan all my activities before I go on holiday, which I did this last week, and it was excellent. Like, I booked all my tickets for things I want to do in advance before I was even in the country. So I know what it's like to be anxious and to try and be prepared, but this feels a little over the top. This feels a little extreme. Even I don't go this far. The online satellite images did not do this property justice. I stalked the home before showing up. According to a realtor website, they purchased the home 5 years ago for $2.5 million. It's worth over $3 million now. I spin in a slow circle, checking out my surroundings. Not much is different from the pictures I saw of the home online. It feels odd because I've seen all the rooms in the house already, thanks to the realtor website. I feel like I already know my way around, and I'm only 5 feet into the house. The kitchen in the pictures was all trimmed with dark cherry cabinetry, but it's been updated, and all the old cabinets have been ripped out, replaced mostly by shelves, and a few cabinets above the countertop that are a blonder wood. Now, I'll be honest, if I invited someone into my home and they went and looked up the rental listing and found out exactly what I was paying and when and what I'd done to the place and mapped it all out before I got here, I would be a little creeped out, I'll be honest. I think it's a little bit weird. Not okay with that. Turns out Lowen is going to be sleeping in what used to be the master bedroom, but Jeremy and Verity have moved out of it now. Even so, I look around the room and this all feels so bizarre, especially that I'll be sleeping in their bed. My eyes are pulled to the headboard, specifically to the teeth marks bitten into the top edge of the headboard in the centre of the bed. I immediately tear my eyes away before Jeremy catches me looking. He'll probably see all over my face that I'm wondering which one of them had to bite the headboard in order to keep quiet during sex. Have I ever had sex that intense? At this point I was like, this just feels unnecessary, feels a little odd. But then I realised why she put this in, because unlike everything else that's happened in this book so far, this is actually a plot point that comes back up later, but for the creepiest reason. You'll see when I get to it. What is wrong with you, Colleen Hoover? That is all I have to ask. Then they come up with a pen name that she's going to be writing under, Laura Chase, and they go and meet Verity, but she's completely out of it. What's weird is they do this whole, like, pen name thing, and they give the nurse who's looking after Verity the pen name instead of her real name. Again, none of this is relevant to the plot. The whole concept of her having a pen name and writing under a different name, and the nurse knowing a different name, none of this matters. None of it comes up again. Nothing at all. No. Why? Why is Colleen Hoover like this? Sorry, I've just been up to change my camera battery and I feel like I should apologise for this now. Sorry if you can hear Kyra snoring throughout this video, but she's sleeping down on the floor over by the camera. She's far from the mic, but her snores echo around the entire flat, basically. And she's just not wanting to leave my side at the minute. Are you, baby? No. Because I've been on holiday for the last week, she's been staying with my parents and we've been apart. And today's our first day back together, so she has not left my side. And I am more than happy with it because I missed you, baby bean. I missed you so much, gorgeous girl. So much. Oh my god, she's beautiful. I love her. I love her. Anyway, Lowen finally meets Verity, right? I'm not sure what I was expecting, but I certainly wasn't expecting this. She's on her back on the bed, staring up at the ceiling, her blonde hair spilled over her pillow. A nurse in blue scrubs sits at the foot of her bed, putting socks on her feet. Crew, that's the kid, the 5-year-old kid, the creepy one from the car. Crew is lying next to Verity on the bed, holding an iPad. Verity's eyes are vacant, uninterested in her surroundings. She's unaware of the nurse, unaware of me, of Crew, of Jeremy as he leans over and brushes her hair from her forehead. She blinks, but there's nothing else there. No recognition that the man she had 3 children with is trying to be affectionate with her. I try to cover the chills that have appeared on my arms. So now I get why Colleen Hoover is fine with her main character lusting after a married man, because it's not like he's really married anymore, is he? It's not like she's a proper wife. She's basically in a coma but awake, and she's brain dead or paralyzed or something. It's not a real wife anymore, or however the hell Colleen Hoover wants to try and justify this. No. Pathetic. He's still married. Come on. Sorry. I glance at the bed. Verity's eyes are still open, connecting with nothing. I'm not sure she's even aware her nurse left. Is she aware of anything? I feel terrible for Crew, for Jeremy, for Verity. I don't know that I'd want to live in this condition, and knowing Jeremy is tied to this life, it's all so depressing. This house, the tragedies in the family's past, the struggles in the present. We find out a little bit more about the series that Lowen/Laura will be writing, just as Lowen finds out herself, because she took on this project without knowing what she was writing, because she's an idiot. Sorry. I look at the shelves containing the series I'm taking over. There are to be 9 total books in the series. 6 have been published and 3 are still to be delivered. The series title is The Noble Virtues, and each book is a different virtue. The 3 that are left up to me are Courage, Truth, and Honour. All 6 books are on her shelves, and I'm relieved to see extras. I pull a copy of the second novel off the shelf and skim through it. So I thought this would be a really interesting kind of plot point, or like some sort of interesting parallel going on here. This thing of like Lowen having to write this Courage, Truth, and Honour books. I thought, ooh, maybe we're going to be looking at those in her own life and seeing, you know, like her write these books alongside her having to address things like courage to herself, truth, like, you know, I thought that would be interesting. Or her learning about Verity's life and learning about her having to show courage and... No, none of this. The book series is, like, the contents of it is barely mentioned any more than this. The titles are never mentioned again. This idea of noble virtues isn't mentioned again. It's barely relevant. Well, it's not relevant. It's stupid. All of this is stupid. There's so much wasted potential here. It just... Lowen admits to Jeremy that she hasn't read any of the books yet, and he's like, oh my god, me neither, we have so much in common. And I thoroughly dislike Jeremy. He's an awful character. Awful. He says, I haven't read any of them either. Not since her first book. I didn't like being inside her head. And because Colleen Hoover doesn't know how to be subtle when drawing comparisons between characters, we get straight up her saying, hey, look at this comparison between Jeremy, the new love interest, and Corey, the old love interest. Look at this comparison right now. Isn't Jeremy great compared to her ex? Look at it, I'm telling you it's here, look at it. Lowen says, I hold back my smile, but he sounds a little bit like Corey right now, unable to separate the world his wife creates from the one she lives in. At least Jeremy seems to be a little more self-aware than Corey ever was. So basically the comparison she's trying to make is Corey read Lowen's first book and fell in love with a character in it and thought that Lowen was that character, so he fell in love with Lowen, but it wasn't the real Lowen, and it caused all these problems. Jeremy read the first book in his wife's series and was like, ooh, I don't like being in your head. I'd rather get to know the real you in person. That's the comparison Colleen Hoover's trying to make. And I was like, okay, this could be a really interesting comparison / dynamic to dive into and look at further. And I thought this would be really interesting. But it's never explored again after this mention of it here. It's just not. And it bothers me. I mean, Jeremy reading his wife's writing is a thing that does come up again, but not in the context of a comparison to her ex, like Lowen's ex. Again, I think it's wasted potential, and I think it's difficult because on the one hand, like, I think what Corey did of falling in love with the idea of Lowen and not the real her is an issue, but I also think kind of what Jeremy's doing is a little bit of an issue as well, because if I was Verity, I would be kind of heartbroken if my partner refused to engage with my work at all. Like, it's one of the reasons that I broke up with my ex of 4 years, because he just stopped taking an interest in my work. He stopped caring about anything I was doing. He kind of stifled me in a lot of ways and stopped me doing a lot of things I enjoyed, and it was a real issue for me, and I think it's important to be with someone who supports you. Whereas, like, my partner now, he reads every single one of my poems that I write, he discusses video ideas with me, he helped proofread my books several times, which are now available on Amazon if you want to get it. It's a little poetry pamphlet and photography book. He comes to every single one of my poetry performances, like he's not missed a single one, and he's really involved and invested and interested in what I'm doing with my time, and I absolutely adore him for that. I think he's just absolutely wonderful and supportive, and I think I need someone like that. So it's hard because, like, Colleen Hoover's trying to make this comparison between the two men and be like, see, what Corey did was bad, and Jeremy's not doing that, so Jeremy must be good. When in reality, I'm like, actually, I can see faults in both sides and both men, and maybe we should realise there's a middle ground and a grey area, and that different types of behaviour will suit different people, you know? Anyway. So then Lowen starts looking through Verity's office and finds nothing she needs for these books she's writing, but she does find a manuscript for a different book, an autobiography, which she just has to read because she's nosy. But she makes plenty of other excuses for it, and she's trying to get to know Verity, all this stuff. But no, she's nosy. Come on. That's what this is. She's nosy, and she fancies Jeremy, so she's trying to find a way to win him over through Verity's writing. She's, like, I think she goes into this, like, being like, ooh, if I can find out how Verity got Jeremy, I can get him too. At least that's what I think. But that's just me. So our next chapter in this book is the first chapter of Verity's autobiography. It's time to learn about Verity. We get her writing. I was super intrigued by this because, as I said, I read the Never Never series a few years back by Colleen Hoover, and from editing Elise's video on Layla, I have read most of that book as well. And I've skimmed plenty of other Colleen Hoover books, and from what I've seen of them all the women in all of these novels seem to have the same basic personality. All the novels are narrated in basically the same tone. She writes a few from men's perspectives, I think, and they also have the same tone. Like, there's no real distinct voices in her characters. Nothing to really distinguish one from the other and make them distinct. Like, even in Layla. How do I mention this without giving too much away? Basically, oh, screw it, I'm going to give you a spoiler for Layla. I'm telling you this now. Right, so basically what it all came down to in Layla is that there was this one female character who had been possessed by the soul, the ghost, the whatever of another, and the boyfriend of the first one didn't notice and didn't know, and it only came out at the end, not because there was anything all that distinct in the two women's personalities, but because the only distinction was one ate pasta more than the other, and both performed oral sex slightly differently. Anyway, my point of all this is to rant that so far, Lowen's voice in this book seems very similar to every other Colleen Hoover woman character that I've come across, and even most of her male characters as well, to be honest. So I was very, very interested going into this to see if she could give Verity a distinctive voice and personality, and it's difficult. She definitely tries to make Lowen the good guy and Verity the bad guy, and she also tries to make Verity's writing a little more mature or accomplished than Verity's narration style, but after a while, like, the first chapter of this seems quite distinct from Lowen's last chapter, but then as the book goes on, it just kind of gets more blurry between them. The writing style becomes more similar, and I don't think she ever manages to make Lowen as good as she wants her to be. And other than different writing styles, I don't really I don't see them as being very distinct personalities in some way. It could be better. Verity's book is called So Be It, and it opens with an author's note. Again, immediately I could see Colleen was trying to give them distinct voices by making Verity's language a bit more complex, but that's kind of as far as it ever goes. And it's not really carried on throughout the whole book. It feels like she kind of forgets after a while and just reverts back to her own voice. Anyway, so it opens with, "The thing I abhor most about most autobiographies are the counterfeit thoughts draped over every sentence. A writer should never have the audacity to write about themselves unless they're willing to separate every layer of protection between the author's soul and their book. The words should only come directly from the centre of the gut, tearing through flesh and bone as they break free. Ugly and honest and bloody and a little bit terrifying, but completely exposed. An autobiography encouraging the reader to like the author is not a true autobiography. No one is likeable from the inside out. One should only walk away from an autobiography with, at best, an uncomfortable distaste for its author." Now, the irony of this, once we learn a certain thing towards the end of the book, I have thoughts, but also I know Verity's meant to be a better writer than Lowen, or at least it seemed to be this way. But this kind of makes me wonder, is this what Colleen Hoover thinks accomplished writing is? Just complex words and pompously referring to yourself as one. When one does this, when one writes a book, like, no. Colleen, actually read a book, please. Sorry, that was a bit rude. But still, yeah. So Verity's story within a story begins in the same way most Colleen Hoover love stories do, with love at first sight. These two are destined to be together. Just like Lowen and Jeremy, Verity and Jeremy were also fated to be together and immediately loved each other. I wouldn't say I was lost before the night I met Jeremy, but I had certainly never been found until the moment he laid eyes on me from across the room. I'd had boyfriends before, one-night stands even, but I'd never come close to imagining life with someone until that moment. When I saw him, I pictured our first night together, our wedding, our honeymoon, our children. Until that moment, the idea of love had always felt very manufactured to me. A hallmark ploy. A marketing scheme for greeting card companies. I had no interest in love. My only goal that night was to get drunk on free booze and find a rich investor to fuck. I was already halfway there, having downed 3 Moscow mules. And judging by the look of Jeremy Crawford, I was going to leave that party an overachiever. He looked rich. And it was a charity event after all. Poor people don't show up to charity events unless they're serving the rich. So, I have many things to say about this. I'm going to tell you this now. From this point onwards, Colleen Hoover tries to make Verity the villain of the book. She's meant to be this awful, mean, nasty person throughout all of this. This is written to make Verity sound awful. That there's a reason for it, but spoilers. So this is meant to make Verity sound awful. And listen to this thing before, the whole thing about like having one-night stands, drinking alcohol, not really knowing if she believed in love. These are all what Colleen Hoover thinks a villain is. A woman is villainous if she dares to enjoy sex and alcohol. It's just a bit sexist, isn't it? As opposed to Lowen, who's meant to be our good, wonderful protagonist, who has had some boyfriends, but not casual sex. And she only has vanilla sex, not kinky sex. You know? Colleen Hoover's really trying to give us a Madonna whore thing going on here and create these dichotomies between the two women, and it just kind of comes across as slut-shaming and sexist, you know? But seriously, I found this opening here very, very similar to the opening of Layla, when the two main characters meet at a party and they immediately fall in love and blah. Go watch Elise's video on it to see what I'm talking about. Moving on, drink for more cliches, guys. He was talking with a few other men, but every time he glanced in my direction, I felt like we were the only 2 people in the room. Every now and then, he would smile at me. Of course he did. I had on my red dress that night, the one I stole from Macy's. The next section here is just bizarre. This reads like it was written by a misogynistic man who doesn't know he's a misogynist, writing what he thinks a feminist woman sounds like, when in reality, it just comes across as objectifying and gross, and it makes me very, very uncomfortable. And I say this as like a very sex-positive person who would never want to shame anyone for things like casual sex, but just listen. It's bad. It was a fuckable dress. The kind of dress a man can easily bypass when he wants between your legs. The mistake women make when they choose their clothes for events like the one I was at is that they don't think about them from the man's perspective. A woman wants her breasts to look good, her figure to be hugged, even if that means sacrificing comfort and wearing something impossible to remove. But when men look at dresses, they aren't admiring the way it hugs the hips, or cinch at the waist, or the fancy tie-up at the back. They're sizing up how easy it will be to remove. Will he be able to slip his hand up her thigh when they're seated next to each other at a table? Will he be able to fuck her in a car without the awkward mess of zippers and Spanx? Will he be able to fuck her in the bathroom without having to remove her clothes completely? The answers to my stolen dress were yes, yes, and yes. Now, as I say, I'm all for sex positivity. I'm all for people feeling empowered and good about themselves and enjoying sex and not being ashamed of that. But a woman literally saying the mistake women make when they choose their clothes for events like the one I was at is that they don't think about them from the man's perspective is just incredibly gross to me. This whole passage implies sex is something done to a woman. It makes the woman passive in all of this, and when she does make choices in her life, it's only ever for the benefit of a man. The idea that women dress to make themselves feel good, for comfort, with themselves in mind, is just completely dismissed and is told that's a mistake. Women should be thinking about the men, how to make it easier for them, how to appeal to the men. We wouldn't want men not liking your Spanx, would we? It's just really gross. It's very disturbing. I don't like it. The fact that this was written by a woman disturbs me. And on the one hand, I know she's trying to make this woman a villain, but nope, no, do not like this. It's like she's trying to make out that Verity is a villain because she enjoys sex, not because what she's saying here is misogynistic. That part of it is never addressed. No. There's way more objectifying stuff, and it's written in such a bizarre way. Like, Verity as a character says she doesn't want to appear desperate, but then compares herself to cheese, an inanimate sacrifice. I realised with that dress on, there was no way he would be able to leave that party without approaching me. I chose to stop paying attention to him. It made me seem desperate. I was not the mouse, I was the cheese. I was going to stand there until he came to me. And when he does come over, he decides to be immediately controlling. He did eventually. I was standing at the bar, my back to him, when he put his hand on my shoulder and leaned forward, motioning for the bartender. Jeremy didn't look at me in that moment. He simply kept his hand on my shoulder as if he were laying claim to me. When the bartender approached, I watched in fascination. Jeremy nudged his head towards me and said, "Make sure you only serve her water for the rest of the evening." So, understandably, she storms off to another bar to get served. He follows her and, "You didn't even give me a chance to explain why I'd like you to have water." I rolled my head in his direction. "I'm sorry, I didn't realise I owed you my time." At that point, I was like, oh, good line, good on her, I like that. But then I realised that she's trying to make Verity the villain, so this is supposed to be a mean thing, and Jeremy's supposed to be the good guy. How? No. He laughed, moving until his back was against the bar, and stared at me with a tilted head and crooked smile. "I've been watching you..." Kyra snores, baby. Sorry. "I've been watching you since the first moment I walked through the door. You've had 3 drinks in 45 minutes, and if you keep going at that rate, I won't feel comfortable asking you to leave..." Oh, she's dreaming. "Oh, baby Bean. Kyra, baby, you're dreaming, baby. It's okay. She is fast asleep. Oh, baby Bean. You've had 3 drinks in 45 minutes, and if you keep going at that rate, I won't feel comfortable asking you to leave with me. I'd much rather you make that choice while you're sober." His voice sounded like his throat was coated in honey. I held eye contact with him, wondering if it was an act. Could a man that good-looking and presumably rich also be considerate? It felt more presumptuous than anything, but I was drawn in by his gall. The bartender approached with impeccable timing. "What can I get for you?" I straightened up, breaking eye contact with Jeremy. I turned and faced the bartender. "I'll have water." Sorry, but this is still controlling. This is not romantic. I get he doesn't want to have sex with her when she's drunk. I get that that makes it dubious consent, but this whole thing here of telling her what she can and can't drink and telling other people what they can and can't serve her as a grown adult woman is not okay. Not by a long shot. Like, they're still strangers, they haven't said a word to each other at this point, and he's literally taking away control of what she can put in her own body because he wants to have sex with her. It's not about what she wants, it's about what he wants. She's never actually asked what she wants. He's just like, "I want to have sex with you, and it'd be better to do that when you're sober so you can consent." Like, if a person, or if Jeremy had said to her, "Hey, would you like to come home with me tonight? Maybe it'd be better if you stay sober for that, if that's okay, because I'd like you to be able to, like, fully consent and know what's happening," that'd be okay. But he's literally just like, "I will be having sex with you. I want to have sex with you. If we're to have sex, this is what you need to do, and I want to have sex with you. So I'm going to decide to limit what you eat and drink from here on out without either asking you. I'm going to control what you eat and drink so I can get what I want from your body and not feel guilty about it." That's not sexy or caring or anything, that's controlling. And I hope I'm expressing this right, you know? I hope I'm expressing this in the way that I mean to, because this bothers me. But she does end up going back to his, after some judgy comments about his car, because it turns out he's not actually rich and he only lives in a studio apartment. But then she's not rich either, so meh. And then we get this absolute cringe-inducing scene. I was on his bed, lying on my back, watching him undress, when I realised I was about to make love for the first time. I'd had sex before, but never with more than just my body. There was so much more of me invested in that moment than my body. My heart felt full of what? I don't know. But my heart had felt empty with the men who came before Jeremy. It was amazing how different sex felt when a person used more than their body. I involved my heart and my gut and my mind and my hope. I fell in that moment. Not in love, I just fell. Down your drinks for all the cliches there. And don't worry, it gets worse. It was as if I'd been standing on the edge of a cliff my whole life. And finally, after meeting Jeremy, I felt confident enough to jump. Because for the first time in my life, I felt confident that I wouldn't land. I would keep flying. It gets worse. I needed to please him. I needed to be what made him smile, breathe, wake up in the mornings. And for a while, I was. He loved me more than he loved anything or anyone. I was his sole reason for living. Until he discovered the one thing that meant more to me than I did. So at this point, I had an alternative title for Verity's book. Codependency. A memoir. But seriously, a little cliffhanger here. I actually quite liked the cliffhanger at this point. I thought, oh, okay, intriguing. What could he possibly have done? But Colleen Hoover cannot trust her audience to have a brain. She does not believe that us, as readers, have the basic intellect to consider these possibilities for ourselves, because at the start of the next chapter, she literally spoon-feeds possibilities of what this secret could be. And this is one of my biggest pet peeves in book, and I'm sure some people don't mind it, but for me, I don't want to be treated like I'm stupid when I'm reading a book. You know, let me figure out what's happening for myself by watching the action unfold and then theorizing for myself. Don't just tell me everything, you know? Like, Colleen Hoover has this whole like, ooh, I discovered the one thing that meant more to him than I did. And immediately, Lowen's like, ooh, what happened? Did he have an affair? Was it the kids? I bet it was the kids. Yeah, and it was the kids. It's like she gave us this cliffhanger and then gave us all the possibilities and then told us, yeah, it's one of these possibilities. She just spoon feeds us the entire plot and it annoys the hell out of me. So another book that did something really similar to this, which really annoyed me, was The Appeal, which is Janice Hallett's first novel, and it's this modern day epistolary novel about drama in a local theatre group that eventually leads to a murder. And overall, I actually really enjoyed the book. I thought it was really, really good. We watch all of this drama unfold by reading back through emails and texts and all sorts of stuff like that. And it's actually really fun because you see how two-faced some of the characters are to each other. You have all these unreliable and biased narrators. I love how everyone in it had a really distinct voice. Like, even before you'd read who the emails or texts were from, you could tell who it was by the completely different tone of voice. Very well written, really brilliant. There was all this tension, especially with the unreliable narrators and stuff, and people telling each other different things. On the whole, I did like the book a lot, but... So, it's this perfect little insight into this small town drama. All the characters felt very real to me and reminded of the kinds of people that I grew up around, and I thought that was brilliant. The mystery element I figured out about halfway through, but still really enjoyed it. What I hated was how each, section had these interjections in between the emails and texts and stuff, where these police investigators would be texting each other, basically just recapping everything we just read, but in a super patronizing way, like, oh my god, did you see when so-and-so said this to so-and-so, but it was different when they told it to so-and-so, and oh my god, did you see line 3 of this flyer when they were... And I'm like, yeah, you don't need to recap this. I just read it all. I found it out for myself. Have a little faith in your reader. You don't need to give me a plot summary. And then the big reveal at the end was done like that. But it was like some teacher holding your hand and explaining the entire plot of the book you just read back to you again. You just read this book. You figured it all out for yourself. And then you have these characters being like, so what I think happened was this person said this to this person, and then they did this to this, and then I'm like, I know, I just read it. You don't need to tell me it all again. It annoyed me a lot. But other than those bits, I really enjoyed the rest of the book, and what I like about Janice's writing is that she's got a lot better. So her second novel, I really wanted to but I just couldn't finish. I was just like, eh. But then I tried her third novel and I thought it was brilliant. I thought she really, really improved and it was really, really cool. It was called The Mysterious Case of the Alperton Angels, and in this one, it was still an epistolary novel, but she didn't have those annoying spoon-feedy recaps and explaining what we just read to us. She'd improved in that respect, and I enjoyed it a lot more and thought it was brilliant. Colleen Hoover could learn something from other authors like Janice, because Colleen Hoover just spoon feeds us what she thinks we need to know, and it annoys the hell out of me. So, please stop thinking your readers are stupid, because they're not at all. On to chapter 5, and we're back to Lowen, and how are we only on chapter 5, for God's sake? In a bizarre moment, Lowen leaves the office and hears a noise, and she immediately thinks, oh my god, Jeremy is raping his wife. Why is that her first thought? Anyway, it's not. Jeremy's not raping her. Jeremy's nowhere even near her. It's just Verity's hospital bed mechanically moving to make sure Verity doesn't get bed sores. I don't understand the point in that scene. Again, I think it's meant to make us not trust Jeremy, but that doesn't really go anywhere. There are more scenes of Lowen. I hate Colleen Hoover's names. Having no spine. I'm heating up leftovers, Jeremy says. You hungry? I was just on my way to the kitchen, actually. Jeremy walks backward. It's pizza. Perfect. I hate pizza. It's just food. Ask for something else. There's no need to lie. I don't get it. Anyway, while she's eating this food that she doesn't like and doesn't want, Jeremy basically confirms everything that Verity wrote about, although Lowen doesn't tell him that she already knows. She doesn't tell him that she found the manuscript and read it and blah blah blah. He's just basically recapping what we just heard and meh. They both have this heart-to-heart about loss and grief, and I sound like a bitch saying this, but it's just not that interesting, I'm afraid, so let's skip forward a bit. Then they have this moment or something like that. How is she gone in 20 minutes from, oh my god, he's raping his wife, to, his eyes remain on me, but it's quiet. Sometimes a look between two people can last so long it shakes you, forces you to look away. So I do. Drink for those cliches. I look at my plate and run my finger along the scalloped edge. His stare felt like it was going far past my eyes, into my thoughts. And even though he doesn't mean for it to, it feels intimate. When Jeremy's eyes are on mine, it feels like an exploration of the deepest parts of me. Now, notice how in that last section, Colleen Hoover completely dropped this whole pretentious, well, when one does this, and blah, 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 and the big vocab for Verity. And she'd gone back into this same, oh my god, I was falling and it was flying, and now she's doing the same for Lowen. They're back to having the exact same voice, and it's annoying, right? Lowen says, the more time I spend in Jeremy's presence, the more eager I am to dive back into that manuscript and get to know him even better, which is just sort of creepy to me. Does she realise that she's doing to Jeremy exactly what her ex was doing to her? Like, getting obsessed with the fictionalised version of him, this written version of him in the manuscript, and not the real one. This seems unhealthy. I wrote here on my notes, I wonder if Colleen Hoover is doing this on purpose. Like, it was going to come back up later with a whole, like, Lowen having this whole, oh my god, I'm doing to Jeremy what Corey did to me, and there'd be this whole comparison, it would be a learning experience, it'd be great. No, she doesn't bother to do this. That comparison is never drawn again. The comparison between Jeremy and Corey is never drawn again in that respect. The Lowen-Corey comparison is not none of this. She just wastes all this potential. On to Verity's autobiography, chapter 2, and remember my comment about codependency? I actually wrote that line in the script before I read this next bit, so this had me giggling to myself. I could write entire novels about the first 2 years we dated, but they wouldn't sell. There wasn't enough drama between Jeremy and me. Hardly any fighting at all. No tragedies to write about. Just 2 years of saccharine love and adoration between the two of us. I was taken by him. Addicted to him. I'm not sure it was healthy, how codependent I was. Still am, really. But when a person finds someone who makes all the negativity in their life disappear, it's hard not to feed off that person. I fed off Jeremy in order to keep my soul alive. It was starving and shriveled before I met him, but being in his presence nourished me. Sometimes I felt if I didn't have him, I couldn't function. This really just doesn't sound healthy, does it? God's sake. Also, Verity just moves in with him without telling him, which again is just massive red flag, right? We'd recently moved in together, unofficially. I say unofficially because there was a point when I just stopped going back to my place. Stopped paying the bills, the rent. It wasn't until 2 months after I completely moved out that Jeremy found out I didn't have my own apartment. Like, that's really not okay, right? I get they were already spending a lot of time together, but she just made a huge financial decision and had no backup for herself and literally changed his life without telling him. And apparently she wasn't even paying him rent, so that doesn't seem fair. Madness. Thankfully, Jeremy isn't happy about it either, so at least this isn't just brushed off by Colleen Hoover. Weirdly, this whole interaction happens while they're having sex. He's literally inside her, so that was a choice. He's stilled inside me, staring down at me with those intense green eyes and lashes so black, I expected to taste licorice when I kissed them. We already lived together, he asked. I nodded, but realised he wasn't reacting the way I hoped he'd react. He seemed blindsided. You don't say. I needed to fix things, to take over and sidetrack him, make him realise that it wasn't a big deal. I thought I told you. He pulled out of me and it felt like a punishment. You did not tell me we're living together. That's something I would have remembered. I sat up and positioned myself so I was on my knees right in front of him, face to face with him. I ran my fingernails across both sides of his jaw and brought my mouth close to his. Jeremy, I whispered, I haven't spent a night away from you in 6 months. We've lived together for a while now. I grabbed his shoulders and then pushed him onto his back. His head met the pillow. I wanted to lie on top of him and kiss him, but he seemed a little angry with me, like he wanted to talk about the subject I considered closed. I didn't want to talk anymore. I just wanted him to make me come. I hate this book. I hate it all. And then she ignores everything he wants and just sits on his face. Not even joking. This is unhealthy, it's immature, it's disrespectful, it's just messed up in every way, right? She orgasms and then writes, and that was that. And that's it. It's just not discussed anymore. She just gets away with overstepping his boundaries and not letting him discuss it or express his own feelings about it. this is awful. Anyway, he ends up getting some job transfer and they have to be apart for a while, and she gets all sad and touches herself a lot, and there's lots of weird masturbation scenes, and Colleen Hoover really does this, like, I'll cover up difficult emotions with sex scenes a lot, and it gets very old very quickly, and I'm as big a fan as the next person, but, like, even I know it's not a substitute for actually bothering to communicate with someone. It gets very awkward to read. Can we stop, please? Verity says, those were thoughts I couldn't admit to him, of course. I might have been obsessed with him, but a woman knows if she wants to keep a man forever, she has to act like she could get over him in a day. And her solution apparently is to become a writer. I think therapy would have been a better option, but here we are. I also think it's interesting that when Colleen Hoover is like, ooh, how do I write a villain? I know, I'll make her obsessed with sex and masturbation. It's like this idea of like, oh, women don't actually enjoy sex. No, only the bad ones do. It's very, very odd. Very odd. So, Verity's first attempt at writing, oh God, there's so many parallels here that could have been explored and just aren't. And Verity's first attempt at writing is to write this fictionalized version of Jeremy, and there's this incredibly uncomfortable oral sex scene, which ends with her puking, and then Jeremy asks to read her book, and it's just like, stop it. Like, who let Colleen Hoover write about sex? Because this whole thing is uncomfortable, and I hate it. But then after she pukes, she's like, okay, you can read the book, and then he thinks it's good, and he tells her, your writing is going to make you famous. Your mind is incredible. If I could fuck it, I would. Again, please stop. That's not a sexy thing to say. Why does Colleen Hoover think when she writes sex scenes, the sexiest thing you can say to someone is just to drop an F word into every sentence, and then just repeat the same thing 20 times a book for 5 books? Just stop it, Colleen. Find a new word. None of this is sexy. I'm tired. I'm so tired. Then, after reading her book with this fictionalized version of him in, he proposes to her, because why not? Then there's more sex scenes that feel like they're written by a 14-year-old who's never actually had sex, including lines like, when he finally came, he did it inside me, without a condom, while his tongue was in my mouth, and his breath was sliding down my throat, and my eternity was entwined with his. I've never found sex less sexy. Again, like, I feel like this whole thing of her writing this fictionalized version of Jeremy and him proposing to her straight after could have been an interesting parallel. Like, there's so many things in this book about people writing about people and falling in love with people and them being attracted to real versions and fictionalized ones and all this stuff going on. And I feel like there could have been something really interesting done with this and explored in it, and it's just not. When you find out the twist of this book, none of this was done well. Turns out Verity got pregnant that night, and the chapter ends with another attempt at a cliffhanger, but this one just comes across as a cringy mess. The last one was far better. This one ends with, and here is where it gets real. The guts of my autobiography. This is the point where other authors would paint themselves in a better light, rather than throw themselves into an X-ray machine. But there is no light where we're going. This is your final warning. Darkness ahead. Chapter 6, and we're back to Lowen, and she's struggling to find any notes for the book she's supposed to be writing, but in the meantime she watches the now empty Verity sitting in the garden. It's as if she were an egg, cracked open and poured out, and all that's left are the tiny fragments of hard shell. I mean, it's not as awful or as cliched as some of the things she's written in this book, but feels a bit disrespectful. Lowen does this whole thing and goes on this little internal monologue about thinking Verity would be better off dead, which is lovely, isn't it? Remember, we're supposed to like Lowen. She's meant to be our protagonist. No. Then she gets creeped out thinking Verity's staring at her, and Lowen feels threatened by her. I think this is meant to be a tense moment, but after the whole spilled yolk thing, it just kind of isn't. Lowen then gets a call, has problems with her rent. Jeremy offers to let her stay there a bit longer, which is super convenient for the plot, isn't it? This is rent at her new place because she got kicked out of her old flat, something. Again, I thought this was all going to come back later. Doesn't. It just keeps her staying with them at Jeremy's for longer, and then it's forgotten about after, like, this chapter. There's more lusting after Jeremy, which makes me uncomfortable because his wife is right there. Come on. She's there. And you're like, oh, she'd be better off dead. Isn't her husband hot? How is that someone we're supposed to root for? Verity's nurse leaves and Crew, the kid, the 5-year-old boy, the one remaining living one, starts waving at Verity's window, and Lowen's all like, did the curtain move? And it starts this whole conspiracy about, is Verity actually able to walk? Is she not? I don't know. Honestly, I didn't care that much. Ugh. Then there's a whole other, like, wait, is the TV on or off in Verity's room? Oh my god, such a mystery. And this was meant to be the whole mystery of the whole book. This is what everything was focused on. Is Verity actually brain dead or not? Is she aware of what's going on around her or not? That was supposed to be the whole mystery. And honestly, I didn't care. Because I didn't like a single character in this book. And I really couldn't care less if they were alive or dead or not. Chapter 3 of Verity's story, and she talks about pregnancy and her body in such a r/men writing women way, with lines like, I knew I was pregnant because my breasts looked better than they had ever looked. I'm very aware of my body, what goes into it, how to nourish it, how to keep it toned. Growing up watching my mother's waistline expand with her laziness, I work out daily, sometimes twice a day. And there's lots of glamorizing really unhealthy eating habits, such as giving into cravings of the mind that ultimately hurt the body is like a weak parent giving into her child. Oh, not okay. Then she starts talking about how the baby in pregnancy stole Jeremy from her, and this whole thing is very conflicting for me, because how do I say this without spoiling things? Okay, I'm just gonna say this. Verity's meant to be the villain, right? Colleen Hoover wants us to hate her, so she has her say and do some really awful things. But Colleen's idea of the worst thing a woman can be is someone who doesn't want kids and doesn't want to be a mother and doesn't want to be pregnant. She villainizes those wants and needs. And through it all, she has Verity say and do some really awful things. But honestly, her reasons for doing these things seem like perfectly normal and reasonable things, like not wanting to be a mother, having eating disorder issues, having mental health problems. In some cases, like, I was like reading this thinking, oh my god, this is postpartum depression and stuff like that. And I was thinking, like, she's having all these issues and Colleen's villainizing it. And it's hard because, like, yes, some of the actions of Verity in this book are awful and villainous and evil, but I wouldn't say her motivations are villainous and evil, but Colleen Hoover villainizes those motivations. Does that make sense? And that's wherein the problem lies. She takes perfectly normal things, like a woman being forced into pregnancy, a woman not wanting kids, a woman having health problems, a woman having mental health problems, and she villainizes them. And she writes about it in such a judgmental way. She wants us to hate this woman for not being her idea of what a woman should be. Does that make sense? And that's wherein the problem lies. It's hard to explain without giving away a certain bit of the book, but my problems with it will make sense as we go on. Okay, let's jump into this. I think for me, a reasonable human would have written this in the sense of, hey, what Verity's feeling about her body is normal, but she is dealing with it in an unhealthy way. The poor woman needs help. But instead, Colleen Hoover chooses to write it in a way that comes across as, oh, Verity's having all these problems. Isn't she an evil bitch for being so shallow and not putting her baby first? And she's selfish and horrible and mean and we should all hate her. These are bad things. And that's a huge problem. So I'm going to read some passages next and you'll kind of start to see what I mean, hopefully. At first, after we found out that the night we got engaged became the night we conceived, I was actually happy. I was happy because Jeremy was happy. And at that point, other than my breasts looking better than ever, I didn't realise how detrimental the pregnancy was going to be to the machine I had worked so hard to maintain, meaning her body. It was around the 3rd month, a few weeks after I found out that I was pregnant, that I started to notice a difference. It was a small little pooch, but it was there. I'd just gotten out of the shower and I was standing in front of the mirror looking at my profile. My hand was flat on my stomach and I felt something foreign, and my stomach was slightly protruding. I was disgusted. I vowed to start working out 3 times a day. I'd seen what pregnancy could do to women, but I also knew most of the damage was done in the last trimester. If I could somehow figure out how to deliver early, maybe around 33 or 34 weeks, I could avoid the most detrimental part of pregnancy. There have been so many advances in medical care, babies born that early are always fine. So I understand that what she's feeling isn't healthy, and the stuff about like wanting to deliver early and stuff is taking it too far, but I think these worries about her body and the changes to it and not recognising her body are all perfectly normal responses and worries and things that people do go through and have issues with, and it doesn't make them evil like Colleen Hoover wants us to think. She's a woman who's clearly struggling and needs help and support, not the shaming that Colleen Hoover is doing and that Lowen does when she reads this stuff. Her and Jeremy have a conversation and he smiled at me. It's a girl, I have a feeling. I want to roll my eyes because technically it was nothing. Not a boy, not a girl. It was a blob. I wasn't that far along yet, so assuming the thing growing inside me was actually hungry or craving any particular type of food was absurd. But it was hard for me to state my case because Jeremy was so ecstatic about the baby. I didn't really care if he treated it like more than it was. Again, please remember that throughout this entire book, and especially by the end of it, Colleen Hoover wants us to hear these things and assume Verity is an evil villain. Like, that's not an exaggeration. We're not talking about a morally grey character here. She wants us to see Verity as an evil villain by saying these things and doing these things, and it just feels like very anti-choice to be like, oh, you know, how dare this evil woman not see her very, very early stage embryo as a full, complete human? How dare she only see it as cells, you know? Bothers me a lot. I get that these views that Verity is expressing don't necessarily mean she's a good mother or that she should be a mother or anything like that, but I don't find them inherently evil or bad, you know? And then while Verity is having all these struggles with, you know, something else living inside her body and her body changing and her not feeling at home in her own body anymore, she finds out she's having twins. She writes, when I found out there were 2 and that they were girls, I was suddenly not okay with being the 3rd most important thing in Jeremy's life. I tried to force my smile when he'd talk about them. I would act like it filled me with joy when he rubbed my stomach, but it repulsed me, knowing he was only doing it because they were in there. Even if I delivered early, it didn't matter. Now there were 2 of them, my body would suffer even more damage. I shuddered daily at the thought of them both growing inside me, stretching my skin, ruining my breasts, my stomach, and God forbid the temple between my legs where Jeremy worshipped nightly. Again, it's so hard because, like, Colleen wants us to hear this and be like, oh, what an awful, evil person. How terrible, how disgusting, how awful. But to me, this is just an argument about why women should have control over their own bodies, why they should be allowed to not have kids if they don't want, why they should be allowed to terminate pregnancies if they don't want. This whole thing is so conflicting because, like, while I was reading this, I was like, well, if she didn't want them so badly, why didn't she terminate the pregnancy? Was she being forced into this in some way? Is this supposed to be set in a country where abortion is illegal? Something like that. But no, you see the reason why at the end, and stupid. This bit though, the next bit, this does seem mean and awful and bad, but at the same time, I also kind of see why at least bits of this might be things that women who don't have access to abortion, who really don't want to go through with pregnancy or can't go through with pregnancy, I think this is things that they probably do experience, and the fact she's villainizing this bothers me. It's hard, it's different. During the 4th month of my pregnancy, I started hoping for a miscarriage. I prayed for blood when I went to the bathroom. I imagined how, after losing the twins, Jeremy would make me his priority again. He would dote on me, worship me, care for me, worry for me, and not because of what was growing inside me. I took sleeping pills when he wasn't looking. I drank wine when he wasn't around. I did anything I could to destroy the things that were going to push him away from me, but nothing worked. They kept growing. My stomach continued to stretch. And again, so in my notes here, I was like, this is why you discuss if you both want kids before you get pregnant, right? Clearly this is a woman who hadn't thought out if she wanted kids or not and just did it because it happened, and that's not okay for anyone involved. Here's what I wrote in my notes at the time. It goes on, and there's clearly a disconnect between their feelings for the kids. It's difficult because on the one hand, I relate to Verity's lack of feelings towards being a mother, but she replaces them with this unhealthy obsession for her partner, so it's difficult to know what to think of her character. And this is what's so difficult and kind of hard to believe about this book, because if this character really had these motivations, she wouldn't have continued with the pregnancy probably, so why did she? So then I was thinking like, oh well, maybe she does have this codependency with her partner and she's ill and that's why she's worried about these things, so it's almost like she's stuck in this abusive relationship with this stuff happening to that she doesn't want, and I was feeling pity for her. But this isn't the reaction that Colleen Hoover wants us to have. She wants us to have the same reaction as Lowen, which is that she doesn't know what to think of this. She just says, I only know that this was written by a very disturbed woman. A woman whose house I currently inhabit. Slowly I lift my head until my eyes are fixed to the ceiling. She's there right now, on the second floor, sleeping or eating or staring blankly into space. I can feel her lurking, disapproving of my presence. And again, it's conflicting because I get Verity not wanting to be a mother. That doesn't make her evil or disturbed or someone who lurks in a house. I pitied her when I was reading this because she was, in my mind, I was like, oh, well, she's clearly a victim of a society that doesn't either fully explain the realities of pregnancy to a woman before she gets pregnant, or she's clearly someone who's never able to consider the fact she could be child-free, or maybe she's trapped in an abusive relationship and having to go through these pregnancies, or maybe these things. And in my notes I wrote, I get that her trying to hurt her unborn fetuses while still continuing the pregnancy is bad, but this says to me she needs mental health treatment rather than, oh my god, she's a disturbed woman lurking in the house. It just doesn't sit right with me. And again, I wrote, once again, it's another case of a book trying to make out that women are evil when they don't want kids. Maybe if she'd had her opportunities actually explained to her and she'd been able to consider them earlier, she'd have known earlier that she didn't want kids and would have been more careful about avoiding pregnancy, and none of these bad things would have happened. And Lowen is all like, oh, she'll have probably changed after the kids were born. Surely she'll be different when she actually meets them and bonds with them. Oh, it'll be different, which is just something all anti-choice people say, right? To try and convince women who don't want to be pregnant to continue with pregnancies they don't want. When in reality, some people are just not cut out to be mothers, and that's okay. It doesn't make them villains. It doesn't make us villains. I wrote here on my notes, the real problem here is a woman who clearly didn't want to be a mother being forced by society and or her partner and the expectations put on her to be a mother, not the fact that she just didn't want to be a mother. Once we get the reveal at the end of the book, you'll understand why my notes aren't quite accurate and making sense, but at the same time they are, because Colleen Hoover wants us to think that a woman not wanting kids is evil. She wants us to think that a woman not wanting to go through with pregnancy is evil. She wants us to think that a woman trying to terminate a pregnancy in whatever way she can is evil. And none of that is okay or true. The fact is, a lot of women are in the same situation where, for whatever reason, they don't have access to terminations or abortions, and they have to resort to things like sleeping pills, wine, later throwing themselves downstairs. They're their last resorts, and these are women who we need to empathise with and care for and look after, not call evil and disturbed and make into these cartoon villains, Lowen just keeps the shame tactics coming. It's really, really bad. Lowen gets awful in this, and she sees a picture of the twins at one point and one has a scar on her face. She was born with it, Jeremy says. The doctor said it was scarring from fibrous tissue. It's not uncommon, especially with twins when they're cramped for room. I look at him this time wondering if that's actually where Chastain's scar came from, or maybe somehow if it was a result of Verity's failed abortion attempt. We'll come back to this story, we'll talk about it more. Chapter 7 ends with a Lowen cliffhanger. Apparently she has an issue with sleepwalking. After the first few times my mother caught me sleepwalking, she became concerned. She put me in therapy, hoping it would help more than the sleeping pills did. My therapist said it was important to unfamiliarize myself with my surroundings. He said it would help if I created obstacles that would be hard for me to move past while I was sleepwalking. A lock on the inside of my bedroom door was one of those obstacles, and while I'm almost certain I locked it before I fell asleep all those years ago, it doesn't explain why I woke up the next morning with a broken wrist covered in blood. And at this point I was like, ooh, mysterious, what's the awful thing that happened? Turns out it's not that interesting. But the lock on the bedroom door is something that does come back later, but again, not for a very interesting reason. So Chapter 8 is boring. They go grocery shopping. Lowen buys tampons and admits, oh my gosh, she may have a crush on Jeremy. Like, you don't say. That's it, end of chapter. In chapter 9, Jeremy broods for a while. Lowen lusts after him some more with cringy lines like, he hasn't shaved in a few days, so his stubble is getting thicker. It looks good on him, but I'm not sure much could look bad on him. Remember, you're playing the drinking game. Drink again for that cliche. Then we get another development, the ooh, is Verity faking mystery? When Crew, the kid, screams from Verity's room, Lowen runs up to him and Crew is on the floor holding his chin. There's blood on his hands and fingers, a knife next to him on the floor. Crew? I reach down and pick him up, then rush him to the bathroom down the hall. I set him on the counter. He says he cut himself with a knife. Crew is wide-eyed looking up at me. He shakes his head, probably trying to hide that he had a knife. I'm sure Jeremy wouldn't approve of that. Mummy said I'm not supposed to touch her knife. I freeze. Your mummy says that? Crew doesn't respond. Crew, I say, grabbing a washcloth. It feels like my heart is stuck in my throat as I speak to him, but I try to hide my fear as I wet the washcloth. Does your mummy talk to you? Crew's body is rigid, and the only thing that moves is his head when he shakes it. I press the washcloth to his chin right before I hear Jeremy's footsteps bounding up the stairs. He must have heard Crew scream. Jeremy shows up. Lowen goes back to get the knife, but oh my god, the knife is gone. Wild. She looks under the bed, and blah blah blah. I put my hand on the mattress to lift myself up off the floor, but immediately shift backwards onto my palms when I catch Verity watching me. Her head is in a different position. Turn to the right, her eyes on mine. Holy poops. I choke on my fear as I scoot myself backwards away from her bed. I end up several feet away from her, and even though her head is the only thing different about her from when I walked into the room, my fear is telling me to run for my life. That is such an exaggeration. Calm down, grow up. I pull myself up using the dresser for support and keep my eyes fixated on her as I move back towards the door, facing her the whole time. I'm trying to suppress my terror, but I'm not convinced she isn't about to lunge at me with the knife she picked up from the floor. Really? Really? The only thing you know about this woman is she's a writer, a successful writer. She didn't want to have kids, but for some reason was forced into them, and you think she's gonna lunge at you with a knife. The villainization of child-free people in this book is disgusting. The villainization of pro-choice people is gross. The villainization of women who want abortions but can't have them is gross. It just reads like anti-choice, pro-life propaganda, and it bothers me. Not all people who don't want kids are murderers. I just don't find any of this tension or fear believable. And besides, let's say Verity is faking. What motivation does she have to hurt her? What does she have against Lowen? I wrote here in my notes, you're an author she liked. She doesn't know you want to sleep with her husband. Probably. It's all just very unbelievable. And I stand by that. What motivation would Verity have to hurt her? Lowen goes back to read another chapter of Verity's autobiography after she's straight up told us she thinks Verity writes villains so well because she clearly is one herself. And at this point I had a thought and I was like, which turns out to be the big twist of the book. So I won't spoil it, but let's just say it became quite obvious to me here. This chapter of the autobiography opens with Colleen trying to make us hate Verity even more. Nothing I tried worked. The attempted self-abortion, the random pills, the accidental fall down a flight of stairs. The only thing that any of my attempts resulted in was a small scar on one of the baby's cheeks. A scar I'm sure I'm responsible for, a scar Jeremy couldn't shut up about. Except we already know the scar wasn't actually from her. It's a common thing when twins share a womb. And I know it's meant to sound awful, but really this is the reality of what it's like for a lot of women who don't have access to safe, legal, affordable abortion. They have to resort to these horrible measures. I try and make excuses for here, saying like, I know Verity technically did have access to abortion, but also she didn't because her husband wanted these kids so much she felt compelled to go through the pregnancy to keep him. But Colleen is all like, nope, definitely her fault. It's because she's evil. And she tries to tell us that the kid got the scar in utero from a wire hanger abortion attempt that went wrong. After the kid was born, Verity says, I touched her cheek, ran my finger down the scar. I guess the wire hanger wasn't strong enough. I probably should have used something that didn't give so easily under pressure. A knitting needle? I'm not sure it would have been long enough. And this is meant to make Verity look bad. It's meant to make us think she's evil and a villain, like I keep saying. But honestly, it just makes me feel sorry for her. At this point, Verity was the only character in the book I actually had any sympathy for, because like these kinds of feelings and actions, these at-home abortion attacks, which absolutely would have endangered Verity's life. She was trying to overdose on sleeping pills, she was chucking herself down the stairs, she was shoving sharp metal up inside her. Like, they're not things you just do on a whim for fun, you know? These are exactly what millions of women used to have to do before abortion was legal. It's what millions of women in countries have to do today, where it's still not legal or accessible, you know? These aren't things Verity did lightly and just for the fun of it. She didn't do it because, oh, I just really enjoy inflicting pain. Oh, I really enjoy killing babies. It was none of that. She stuck wire up herself and threw herself down a set of stairs because she was a woman who was suffering, who just wanted the unwanted pregnancy that was causing her so much pain to stop. This isn't evil. Verity's a victim here. At this point, Verity's the victim. I wrote in my notes, I find it very hard to hate Verity in the way Colleen wants us to. It's clear to me she never wanted to be a mother, never wanted to be a host to other living things. She never wanted any of this but felt forced into it. I feel for her, and this villainization of women who don't want to be mothers is sexist crap. I felt like I literally had no idea about this aspect of the book when I started reading it and decided to make this video and stuff, but I have to say, as a child-free woman and a feminist who values bodily autonomy, I'm clearly not the right audience for this book. And I wrote in my notes, maybe an anti-choice fundie would like it more. There are passages, even after the kid's born and stuff, where Verity clearly is so uncomfortable with being a mother, but she just tells herself she needs to get used to it. And like, I'm sorry, but this isn't an evil person. This just reads like a person being forced into a role that's not right for them and is struggling with it. Like, obviously I feel for the kids in this situation, of course, because I believe that every kid deserves to be born into a world where they're wanted and cared for, but that's why I fight so hard for people to be able to make decisions for themselves about whether they actually want to bring kids into the world or not. That's why I and so many others actually fight for access to like safe legal abortion and stuff like that for women who don't want to be mothers and wouldn't make good mothers and stuff. It gets worse. Colleen then goes on to demonize her even more for not wanting to breastfeed, which is insane. It's absolutely okay to decide you don't want to do that. Plenty of mothers can't breastfeed. Plenty don't want to. It's all okay. It doesn't make her evil or selfish. Doesn't make her a villain. And the thing is, right, when Verity says she doesn't want to breastfeed and reminds Jeremy that there's two of them that need feeding, that's going to be like a lot of strain and pain and difficulty and stuff. She says, I didn't like the look on Jeremy's face, like he was disappointed in me. I hated to think this was how it was going to be. Him taking their side, me not mattering anymore. And I was like, oh my god, stop shaming her. I just feel like it's so easy for men like Jeremy in real life and in this book. He wanted kids so badly, he impregnated her before talking it through with her, and then she was the one who had to grow these kids and now feed them with her body. And he's shaming her for not being able to do it in the way that he wants her to. I wrote in my notes, let this woman who never wanted kids in the first place finally have her body back. You know? God's sake. But no, she gives in because it's what Jeremy wants. I couldn't take my eyes off Jeremy as I waited for him to dismiss me of that kind of torture. It killed me to know that he wanted me to breastfeed them when there were so many perfectly adequate alternatives. But I nodded and pulled the sleeve of my gown down because I wanted to please him. I wanted him to be happy that I was the mother of his children, even though I wasn't happy about it. It felt wrong. So this poor woman, even though she doesn't want to breastfeed, she does because she feels forced into it. And Colleen Hoover wants us to be disgusted with her and think she's the villain in all this. Making you bed, baby. Good girl. Well done, Cuckoo. Well done, Cuckoo. In my original notes here I wrote, as the book goes on, it's clear that not only was Verity someone who never wanted kids, but she clearly experiences some sort of postpartum depression or other mental health problem, and she's demonized and called evil for it. It's disgusting. In the next present-day chapter, Lowen describes Verity as cold and hard, and how she only sees darkness, and she's super angry at her. And Lowen has the cheek to say, or maybe Verity just didn't deserve to be a mother. And I was like, no, Verity didn't deserve to be forced into motherhood when she didn't want it. And then I made this comparison, right? I said, it's like if someone offers me shellfish and I'm like, no thank you, no thank you. And then they force me to eat them anyway. And I have an allergic reaction to shellfish because I do. And then the person turns around and says, well, you didn't deserve shellfish anyway. It's like, no, I didn't deserve to be forced to eat something that could kill me. I didn't deserve to have that forced onto me. Shellfish are fine. for other people, but I'm allowed to decide what goes into my body based on my needs, just like other people are. Same with Verity and kids, same with me and kids. If she's not someone who wanted kids, who had pregnancy forced on her, then it's not that she didn't deserve to be a mother, it's that she shouldn't have had it forced on her in the first place. It's like when people turn around to me in the comments and say like, you'd be a terrible mother anyway. Be ashamed. You don't deserve to be a mother. And I'm like, none of that bothers me, it's fine. I don't want to be a mother. Why are you shaming me for telling me I'd be bad at something that I don't want to do and I'm not going to do? You know? It's very confusing to me. Lowen then makes me hate her even more by saying, I think about having children sometimes. I'll be 32 soon, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't worry the opportunity might never present itself. But if I ever do find myself in a relationship with a man I'd want to father my child, it would be someone like Jeremy. 1, 32 is not that old, stop it. And 2, she's basically gone into Verity's home, taken over her work, and is now taking over her life completely. I wrote in my notes at this point, Lowen is the villain of this book. Change my mind. And also Jeremy. This book goes so far to call Verity codependent on Jeremy and place the blame for that entirely on Verity, but let's not forget that he's been controlling her body from the very first moment they met, and he's still doing it however many chapters into her autobiography. He's got full control over her body. Like, I don't think Verity's the villain in this. I think Lowen and Jeremy are. And when we find out the twist at the end, you'll see I was even more right. God's sake. Oh my god, Lowen has the cheek to say, rather than appreciate the wonderful father he seemed to be, Verity resented him. Like, yeah, because he forced something into her body that he didn't want. If my partner got me pregnant and wouldn't let me get rid of it, I'd resent him too. Lowen starts looking through family photos and is like, why did Harper never smile? Jeremy leans over, taking the picture of Harper from my hand. She was diagnosed with Asperger's when she was 3. She wasn't very expressive. My notes at this point say, oh god, Colleen, please don't turn this into some sort of ableist neurodivergent shaming novel, please. Like, as an autistic woman myself, I had worries. Thankfully, this isn't really brought up again, so I'm not quite sure what the point of it was, but here we are. Jeremy then admits to Lowen that when he found out about his wife's car accident, he was angry at her, and Lowen concludes, he must think she hit the tree on purpose, which, at this point, I was like, yeah, that seems pretty likely, actually. This seems like a really depressed woman who needed some serious help. This clearly wasn't the first time she'd endangered her own life. At this point, after him being like, oh, I'm so angry with my wife, and Lowen, like, shaming Verity in her head, Jeremy nearly kisses her, but they're interrupted by the son, Crew, thankfully. Crew is angry that they're looking at family photos, so that's the thing. This was another thing where I was like, oh, see, maybe the kid's got some, like, problems and killed his sisters and he's the bad guy, but no, that's not true. And, like, his behaviour here is never explained, so there's that. Next chapter! Lowen is all like, ooh, this house is creepy, and then goes to speak to Verity's nurse, who scolds her. The nurse is great, I love the nurse. So the nurse takes her outside and says, I don't expect you to know this, especially if you've never been around someone in Verity's condition, but it's not respectful to discuss people like her as though they aren't right in front of you. I'm gripping my spoon, about to pull it out of my mouth. I pause for a moment, then shove the spoon back into the pudding cup. I'm sorry, I wasn't aware that's what I was doing. And I was like, ha, yes, you tell her, April. That's the nurse. And then that's it. That's like the whole thing. And like, I thought that was great. But then Lowen never changes her behaviour. Well, actually, no, she does. She does address Verity at some point. And it's horrific. But we'll get there, don't worry. There's more of these, like, red herrings about, ooh, maybe Crew is evil, and then nothing ever comes of it. Crew comes in carrying a turtle and tells Lowen that he killed his last pet turtle. Daddy says I can't have another turtle because I killed my last turtle. I swing my head towards Crew. You killed him? How did you kill him? Lost him in the house, he says. Mummy found him under the couch and he was dead. And Lowen says, oh, okay. My mind was going somewhere much more sinister with that. For a second, I thought he'd murdered the turtle intentionally. And I wrote in my notes, why is Lowen so suspicious of everyone in the family except Jeremy? I hope it's revealed at the end that Jeremy is the villain, because he is. Also, yeah, I think this is one of the few last crew red herrings. Again, nothing ever comes of this. The turtle's never brought up again. I don't get the point. Jeremy, Lowen, and crew all go out for dinner. Lowen is all like, oh my god, this feels just like a date. Is this a date? No, it's not a date. It feels like a date. It's cringy. I hate it. Stop it. Why does Colleen want us to root for these two? It's awful. He's still married. Stop. When they get back, I sigh heavily and then go straight to Verity's office and close the door. I need to distract myself. I feel an emptiness, an ache in my stomach that I don't think is going to go away. Like I need more moments with him. Moments I can't get. Moments I shouldn't get. Stop it. No. Then, in a super creepy way, she goes back to reading Verity's biography because I'm not sure what kind of person that makes me in this moment, because reading this is wrong on so many levels, but it isn't as wrong as crossing that line with him physically would be. I can't have him in real life, but I can, for God's sake. But I can learn what he's like in bed to aid in all my fantasies I'm probably going to have about him. Stop it. Lowen is the villain. Jeremy is the villain. These are the bad people. This is even worse reading it the second time around. Oh, this is creepy. Stop it. In the next chapter of Verity's book, we see what I thought was her postpartum depression getting really bad and her feeling guilty for it. And Colleen uses it as a chance to be like, yeah, see, what a bitch. And I'm like, no, Colleen, stop it. You're the bitch. Verity says, I was about to have a breakdown. I could feel it. Or at least a meltdown. A temper tantrum. A hissy fit. Any of them would have been inappropriate though. I just couldn't take it anymore. If one of them wasn't crying, the other one was. If one of them wasn't hungry, the other one was. They rarely slept at the same time. See, this was a woman struggling. This was a woman who needed help. This is a woman who shouldn't be painted continually as the villain. This is a woman in distress. So Jeremy goes back to work, and Verity says, I would wake up with him so he could see me caring for the girls. After he was gone, I would put them back in their cribs, unplug their monitors, and go back to bed. From the day he started back at work, I began getting more sleep than I think I'd ever gotten. We were in the corner apartment, and their room didn't butt up to any other apartment, so no one could hear them cry. And I know this is awful, and the kids don't deserve it, and I'm not excusing this behaviour or saying it's okay or encouraging it, but clearly this is the behaviour of an ill woman who was out of her depth and needed some help and was too afraid of her husband leaving her to be able to actually ask for it. She's a victim as much as the kids here. Then there's this scene where, oh for God's sake again, there's another scene where Verity performs oral sex on Jeremy while he's asleep, so there's this like dubious issue of consent, very uncomfortable to read. This dubious consent thing is another thing you'll see repeated throughout so many Colleen Hoover books. Do not like it. Stop it. Back in the present day, instead of seeing a mentally ill woman, Lowen calls Verity callous and says, I've been under the impression that Verity might have been a sociopath, but now I'm leaning more towards psychopath. No, she's ill. I put the manuscript away and used Verity's computer to refresh my memory of the exact definition for psychopath. I scrolled through every personality trait: pathological liar, cunning and manipulative, lack of remorse or guilt, callousness and lack of empathy, shallow emotional response. She displays every characteristic. Bit like you then, Lowen. Sorry. Don't like her. The only thing about her that makes me question if she was a psychopath is her obsession with Jeremy. Psychopaths find it more difficult to fall in love, and if they do, it's difficult for them to retain that love. They tend to move on quickly from one person to the next, but Verity didn't want to move on from Jeremy. He was Verity's entire focus. The man is married to a psychopath, and he has no idea, because she did everything she could to hide it from him. Stop it. Stop it now. Then, oh my god, then this is one of the worst scenes in the book. It's so uncomfortable to read. There's this really creepy scene where Lowen starts wearing Jeremy's clothes and has this fantasy of having sex with him while she's in the bed that him and his wife used to share. And I do not like it at all. I do not like it. When I made the prediction about her taking over Verity's life in the beginning, and I thought she was going to be portrayed as this villainous stalker person, but that's not how she's portrayed, but that's exactly what she's doing, and I don't like it. I don't like it. In the next chapter, Lowen has a sleepwalking episode and wakes up in Verity's new bedroom, in bed with her. Again, how is Lowen not the villain here? This is creepy as hell. Jeremy catches her and she tells him all about her little problem, and he says, "You're okay, it's okay. Sleepwalking is harmless." I shake my head in profound disagreement. No, Jeremy, it's not. I hold my hand to my chest, still clutching my wrist. I've woken up outside before. I've turned on stoves and ovens in my sleep. I blow out of breath. I broke my hand in my sleep and didn't even feel it until I woke up the next morning. A rush of adrenaline surges through my body as I think about how I can now add what just happened to the list of disturbing things I've done in my sleep. Although unconscious, I still walked up those stairs and crawled into that bed. If I'm capable of something that disturbing, what else am I capable of? Then we get Lowen's big reveal of this big trauma she's had, and I don't think it's that bad. Maybe call me crazy, but I don't think it's this big shame, scary thing. I don't know. I mean, obviously it's a bit of a problem, but this idea that, like, this made her mum terrified of her makes no sense to me. The fact that she's like, "Oh my god, I don't want any publicity in case people find out I sleepwalk," makes no sense to me. It's very weird. And apparently, her crawling into bed with Verity's a bit weird, but it's not like, well, I don't know. I don't think it warrants this line, which is, "The only thing I could probably say to defend myself is to tell Jeremy I'm not nearly as horrific as his own wife, but I'm not even sure if I believe that. I'm not horrific yet, and don't trust myself enough to say that I never will be." I have no words. So it turns out this horrible, horrific trauma that Colleen Hoover has been alluding to since, like, the 3rd page of the book is this. She had a sleepwalking episode as a kid and it was caught on camera. At 3 o'clock that morning, the footage showed me walking outside onto the front porch. I climbed upon the thin porch railing and stood there. That's all I did at first. Just stood there. For an hour, Jeremy. We watched the entire hour waiting, hoping to see if the footage was broken, because no one should be able to remain balanced for that long. It was unnatural, but I never moved. I never spoke any words. And then I jumped. I must have hurt my wrist in the fall, but in the footage I showed no reaction. I pushed off the ground with both hands, then walked up the porch steps. You could see the blood already coming from my hand, dripping onto the porch, but my expression was dead. I walked straight back to my room, and I fell asleep. My eyes returned to his. I have no recollection of that. How can I inflict that much pain on myself and not be aware of it? How can I stand on a railing for an entire hour without swaying? Not even a little bit. The video frightened me more than the injury did. And does anyone else see this as a massive anticlimax? This is her big secret. This is her big trauma. Again, he hugs me, and I'm so grateful that I cling to him tightly. My mother sent me away for a 2-week psychiatric evaluation after that, I say into his chest. When I returned home, she'd moved further down the hall into a spare bedroom where she placed 3 locks on the inside of her bedroom door. My own mother was terrified of me. And I'm like, yeah, it's a bit weird, but surely that's an overreaction on the mother's part, right? Why not focus on getting her some help instead of being scared of her and moving away from her? What did the mother think? She was, like, possessed by a demon? God knows. I think the mother's reaction is probably what messed her up more than the sleepwalking itself, right? Ridiculous. In the next chapter, Jeremy's solution to all this is to put a lock on the outside of Lowen's bedroom door and lock her in, which isn't horrifying or controlling or dangerous at all, is it? God's sake. For some stupid reason, she agrees to this. Why? Because you think he's hot, so you'll let him lock you in a room? Like, you literally just volunteered to be a man's prisoner. Are you an idiot? I was like, what if he has an accident in the night and you're trapped in there? What if there's a fire and you can't get out? It's literally just a disaster waiting to happen. And I said, I bet this is going to come back to bite you in the bum later in the book, but it'll be Verity who's the bad guy by taking advantage of the situation or locking her in or something. I was kind of right, but in the most anticlimactic way possible. That's what this book is. One series of disappointments after the other. Now you'll have to excuse me because look at the screenshots and stuff of the book is about to change, and you'll have to excuse me if this gets a bit ridiculous because I was reading and writing this segment at the airport at like 1 a.m. before I went on holiday, so enjoy! Back to Verity's life story, and we hear more about how she feels absolutely trapped, and this is meant to make us hate her more, but I just feel sorry for her. I joked earlier about, like, codependency in her needing therapy, but she really, really does. She's literally afraid to leave Jeremy. She's been forced into a life she never wanted, forced to host kids she never asked for, all because she's honestly too afraid to leave him. It might be easy to sit here and judge her and call her like callous and cold and be like, yeah, she didn't want it, she should have just left, like Lowen does. But honestly, like, I think it's really hard when you are that dependent on someone and you feel like you have no other choice. From all the stuff Verity says, she was clearly dependent on Jeremy. She was relying on him for home and shelter and all her emotional support and all that stuff, and she really feels like she had no other choice, you know? So I pity her. I really pity her. And she says, it had been 6 months since they were born, and I still wish they didn't exist. But they did, and Jeremy loved them, so I tried. Sometimes I wondered if it was worth it. Sometimes I wanted to pack my bags and leave and never look back. He was the only thing stopping me from going through with it. I knew a life without Jeremy was not a life I wanted to live. I had 2 options. Live with him and the 2 girls he loved more than me, or live without him. These are not the words of the villain Colleen Hoover wants us to think she is. You know? Verity starts having dreams about one of her kids killing the other, and she does feel grief for this. So she's not the heartless monster Lowen's been saying she is, clearly, right? Because she is like, oh, I love one of my daughters, so she's capable. Then it gets weird again. There's just another really uncomfortable sex scene that's unnecessary, and I don't like it. Bear in mind at this point, Verity and Jeremy have been together God knows how many years. They have 6-month-old kids, and Verity decides to go down on him in the middle of the night to stop him asking her why she's crying, and then decides to ask him how many people he's been with, and slut shames everyone he was involved with before her when she gets her answer. All of this is gross. I let him slide out of my mouth. How many women have sucked your dick? He lifted up onto his elbows and looked down at me perplexed. Are you serious? More like curious. He laughed, dropping his head back to the pillow. I don't know, I've never counted. That many, I teased. I climbed up his body and straddled him. I liked when he jerked beneath me and gripped my thighs. If it's not an immediate answer, that means it's more than 5. Definitely more than 5, he said. More than 10? Maybe, possibly, yes. It's odd how that didn't make me jealous, but 2 infants could leave me seething. Maybe it was because the girls were currently in his life, but all his past whores were just that, in the past. More than 20. He raised his hands to my breasts and cupped them, squeezed them. He was getting that look on his face. That was my cue I was about to be fucked hard. That's probably a good estimate, he whispered, pulling me to him. He brought his lips close to mine and stuck his hands between us, rubbing me. How many guys have licked your pussy? 2. I'm not a whore like you. He laughed against my lips, then rolled me onto my back. But you're in love with a whore. Wow. Thanks, Colleen Hoover. Great. Please stop writing. I'm thoroughly regretting making this video and having to read this book this many times. Also, fun fact for you, there's no point to that scene. It has no consequences. Colleen Hoover just fancied a little bit of slut-shaming. Back to the kids, and Verity realizes she now loves Chastin, but hates Harper, so she decides to kill Harper in her crib. Seriously, what the hell am I even reading anymore? What is this book? She really, stepped up the whole Verity's a villain thing, and I get it, yeah, trying to kill a kid is pretty bad. That makes someone a villain, but I suddenly had this overwhelming urge to rectify what I knew was going to happen. Never in all my life had a dream been that vivid to me. I felt like if I didn't do something about it in that moment, it would come true any day. For the first time, I couldn't bear the thought of losing Chastin. It almost hurt as much as the thought of losing Jeremy. I'd heard of people choking in their sleep on their own vomit though. That would probably be harder to declare an intentional act. I touched my finger to Harper's lips. Her head moved back and forth quickly, thinking it was a bottle. She latched— this is disturbing, I'm sorry, get ready for this. She latched on and began sucking the tip of my finger, but she wasn't satisfied. She released my finger and started screaming again, kicking. I shoved my finger further into her mouth. She was still crying, so I continued to shove. She made a gasping sound, but was somehow still crying. Maybe one finger wasn't enough. I pushed 2 fingers into her mouth and throat until my knuckles were pressed against her gums and she was no longer crying. I watched her for a moment, and soon her arms began to stiffen between each violent jerk of her little body. Her legs locked up. This is what she would have done to her sister if I hadn't done it to her first. I'm saving Chastin's life, but she's interrupted by Jeremy, and she later wonders, ooh, did he watch me trying to commit murder on the baby monitor? Who knows? End of chapter. Now actually remember this scene because it will come back later. But I get it, you know, a woman who tries to kill a baby, yeah, that's pretty bad, I'll give you that. At this point I'm like, oh look, they're all villains. We'll come back to this. Next chapter, nothing much happens, except it turns out that Verity never read Lowen's book. It was Jeremy that was the fan all along. I was like, meh, I don't care, but okay. I guess it gives us an indicator of who Jeremy is because he's willing to just lie to people's faces, so that's fun. But yeah, let's totally root for him and Lowen to be together, right? Next chapter is back to Verity's book, and we get one of the most unhealthy arguments between Jeremy and Verity ever. Jeremy's been giving her the silent treatment for days, so instead of asking him why, she's just like, I'll cook him a meal and have sex with him. But he barely acknowledges her, and then she calls him pathetic, and he responds with anger and violence, because I think he's an abuser, and if this is his response, yeah, he seems abusive. I think he's the villain in this book. Well, I was thinking that at this point. Just wait to the end. His fists clenched and then unclenched. Then he stood up and slapped his bowl, sending it across the table and all over the dining room wall. I'd never seen him lose his temper. I stiffened, wide eyes, as he stomped out of the kitchen. I heard him slam our bedroom door. I looked at the mess and knew I'd have to clean it up after we'd made up, so he'd know how much I appreciated him, even if he was a major effing douche. It's just all so unhealthy. Like, just have a discussion like the adults you're supposed to be. Unnecessary. All this throwing and shouting. No need for the violence. Turns out all of this is because he's noticed that she favourites one twin over the other, and that's what he's mad about. This could have been fixed earlier if they'd bothered to just have a conversation, you know? The fight then ends when Verity fakes a pregnancy. Everyone in this book is a dysfunctional mess, right? But from what I can gather, it did actually end in Verity getting pregnant a couple of weeks later with Crew, so I guess there's that. But she was all like, oh, I'll just fake a miscarriage if I don't get pregnant, but then she did get pregnant, so anyway. Back in the present day, and Lowen admits she's bored of reading about so much sex between Verity and Jeremy, which is what I believe we were all thinking 100 pages back in this book. And then she admits that no, actually it's not boredom, she's actually just jealous about reading about the man she's currently obsessed with having sex in the past with his current wife. The jealousy does come out in quite a funny way. It got to a point where I started to feel jealous. I don't like reading about Jeremy's sex life. I could read more of Verity's autobiography, but I'm not in the mood to read about all the ways Verity can suck her husband's dick. And I'm like, yeah, that's what I've been thinking about this entire book. For God's sake. Lowen and Jeremy then have this talk about how she might leave soon, and he's all like, no, you've not stayed long enough. And I'm like, you married, mate, sort your life out, stop it. She then tries to make excuses like, I understand he made vows, but at what cost? His entire life? People get married assuming they'll live long, happy lives together. What happens when one of those lives is cut short, but the other is expected to live out those vows for the rest of their life? It doesn't seem fair. I know if I were married and my husband were in Jeremy's predicament, I wouldn't want my husband to feel like he could never move on, but I'm not sure I'll ever be as obsessed with a man as Verity was with Jeremy. Like, sorry, but if I was in a vegetative-like state, but still likely conscious and aware of everything that was happening, I would not want my partner to move on by sleeping with some other woman in my house that I paid for, in my bed, while I just lay upstairs unable to do anything about it. And that's what Lowen wants to do. She's like, oh, it's not fair to Jeremy, she'd be able to move on. Oh, Verity's such a bitch. Lowen, you're the one in her house, paid for with her money, eating her food, paid for with her money, fantasizing about her husband in her bed while she's up there and you're writing her books and she can do nothing about it. And you're like, oh, she should just move on, let him move on. And you're like acting like she's the selfish one. You're the selfish one, Lowen, and I'm finding it really hard to speak at this point. I'm very tired. God's sake. Lowen then gets turned on by Jeremy touching her driver's license. I could not make this stuff up, could I? The next day is Lowen's birthday, so Jeremy makes her a cake and kisses her. I'm like, boo, married man, boo. I hope your wife gets revenge. That would be a happy ending. No way I'm rooting for these two. Boo. You can tell I was tired when I was writing these notes, right? I part my lips and he sweeps his tongue inside my mouth. The slowness of the kiss doesn't last long. As soon as we get our first tastes of each other, the kiss becomes manic. It's everything I imagined kissing him would feel like. Radiation, explosives, dynamite, and anything and everything dangerous. And my notes here literally just are the word vomit. Oh my god. Also, let's drink for those cliches and because I need more caffeine to stay awake through this. He starts to undress her when I lift my head to watch him, but my blood runs cold when my eyes are pulled to the figure standing at the top of the stairs. She's just standing there, watching her husband as his mouth roams over my breast. My entire body stiffens beneath Jeremy. Verity's fists clench at her side before she rushes back in the direction of her room. I don't blame her. I gasp, shoving him, pushing him. Verity, I say breathless. He stops kissing me and then lifts his head, but he doesn't move. Verity, I say again, wanting him to understand that he needs to get the F off me. He lifts up onto his arms, confused. Verity, I say again, but with more urgency. It's all I can say. My fear has taken hold of me as I struggle to inhale and exhale. What the F? Serves you right. Serves you right. Serves him right as well for cheating on his wife. But Jeremy's all like, babe, you're just paranoid. Shh, like really gaslighting her. Full on gaslighting. And his solution to make Lowen feel better is to put a lock on Verity's door. So even if she is conscious and able to walk, she won't be able to escape to catch them cheating. Why is this man's solution to every single problem? Better put a lock on a woman's door. Better lock her in a room. Oh, for God's sake. This book. We're nearly there. Come on, we can get through this. Back to Verity's book, and she talks about how now she's a writer and she's earning all this money and she's paying for all this stuff and the house and everything. She'd have to leave for work sometimes to go on like press tours and book signings and stuff like that. And when she got back, and I quote, Jeremy would fuck me like I was his virgin. Well, that's repulsive. Shame on you, Colleen Hoover, for writing that line. Then she goes into this story about how Chastin died of a peanut allergy while at a friend's house, and Verity's all like, ooh, it must have been Harper's fault. Every time I looked at Harper, I could see her guilt. I've been waiting on this to happen for years. Years I knew from when they were 6 months old that Harper would find a way to kill her. And again, at this point, I was like, this is an ill woman who needs mental health treatment, not all this shaming, right? Even her act of like trying to kill the kid is the act of a mentally ill woman. Present day, and Lowen starts testing Verity to see if she's really paralyzed or not, and she does this by throwing things at her, calling her names, and swearing at her. Again, this is the woman that's meant to be our protagonist, and there's a helpless woman alone in a vegetative state, and our protagonist, our hero, the one we're meant to be rooting for, does this. Apologies for the language here. You're a I mutter. You don't even deserve the body you're trapped in, I whisper, staring straight into her eyes. I hope you die with a throat full of your own vomit, the same way you attempted to kill your infant daughter. I stand up and lean into her, bringing my mouth to her ear. Jeremy is going to fuck me in your bed tonight. Yeah, no one in this book's a good person, are they? No, none of them. Then she gets worse because after cooking a meal in Verity's kitchen and putting Verity's son to bed, Lowen wonders if she's going to be sleeping with Verity's husband that night in Verity's bed, then tells Jeremy he should put Verity into a care home so he doesn't have to take care of her. Lowen is a terrible person. I'm not rooting for these two to get together. I don't like her. How is she the main protagonist of this book? Why does Colleen Hoover want us to root for her so... Jeremy disagrees at first and it's like, oh no, I couldn't put her in a home, but then it's like, actually, let's have sex first, then I'll decide. And he does this by just barking commands at Lowen, and again, we see he's controlling, and I would say kind of borderline abusive here. Again, Jeremy is the villain. None of this is romantic, it's just, take your clothes off, he says without facing me, as he's locking my bedroom door. It is a command. So many emotions flood me as I remove my panties. Fear, excitement, irritation, desire, trepidation. Again, seems unhealthy, and also step away from the married man, but also controlling vibes from Jeremy, right? Then they make this big thing about not having a condom and she's not on the pill, so I guess they're just asking for STIs and unplanned pregnancies like an idiot, and I was like, well. And I also feel like Jeremy has some sort of breeding kink, and it kind of makes me uncomfortable because of all his like willingness to just have unprotected sex with all these women and getting off on it and stuff. There's a really unnecessary sex scene that culminates with Lowen sat on Jeremy's face, and I'm sorry I even have to say this. It ends with her sat on Jeremy's face while she she orgasms, and she bites into the headboard in exactly the same place that Verity did. And it's so uncomfortable to read, and it talks about their teeth marks lining up and stuff. And I'm like, is there anything else you want to take from her, Lowen? Really? Creepy as hell, stop it. I can feel Verity's teeth marks beneath mine. Different, unaligned with my own. I bite harder into the wood as I come, determined to leave deeper marks than she ever did. You're a messed up person. Messed up. Jeremy then starts asking Lowen about her past relationships and gets jealous of Corey, the agent, and he's all, I feel a connection with you I've never felt with anyone before, not even Verity, and it just feels like love bombing and creepiness, and definitely still get abusive vibes from Jeremy. Not okay. And then, my notes at this point literally just say in all capital letters, ha 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 ha, because I found this really funny, and also it was like nearly 3 a.m. at this point, and I was just done with this book. While they were busy having sex, someone came along and locked them into the room from the outside. The lock that Jeremy put on the door to lock Lowen in has been used against them, and I was like, see, not so nice when it happens to you, is it, Jeremy? And I said, honestly, if I was Verity, I'd have done the same. So Jeremy assumes that Crew locked them in, Lowen thinks it's Verity, and Jeremy's all, like, the only thing Jeremy is concerned about is, oh no, what will Verity's nurse think if she catches us in here together? I care about other people's opinions. And then he breaks the bedroom window, climbs out, frees Lowen, sadly. How anticlimactic. So this whole, that is what the whole trauma thing has been leading up to. That is it. The whole, like, ooh, I had past trauma, ooh, I sleepwalk, ooh, my mummy issues, leads to him putting a lock on the door so someone can come along and lock them in so that he can break a window and let her out again in the space of 5 minutes. It all takes like half a page. That's the climax of that entire build-up. Do you see what I mean about things just not paying off in this book? And then Lowen's sleepwalking is never mentioned again. The mummy issues are never mentioned again. None of it. That was it. That was what it was all for. I wish they'd been locked in there forever. Like, it wasn't even high stakes in breaking the window and going around the outside, you know? Because I think they're on the ground floor. He had to drop like half a foot. Back to Verity's book, and we learn about how Harper dies, or as Verity says, got what was coming to her. Again, this is pretty awful, but it feels like a mentally ill woman, so... It starts with Verity getting mad at Harper for not crying when her sister dies. She screams at the autistic child for not being able to express her emotions properly. This annoyed me, and yeah, you know. Later in the day, she takes the kids out onto the lake in their back garden in a canoe with a plan to drown Harper. She capsizes the boat, saves Crew, but leaves Harper to drown. And at this point I was like, yeah, okay, Verity's awful too. They're all awful people. And my notes say, I hate this miserable book. Lowen's response to reading this and finding this out is to vomit and take a bunch of Xanax, the tablet. She's been taking a lot of it throughout the book, and again I was like, oh, okay, so maybe she does have this pill problem. There's the morphine mentioned at first. Xanax has been mentioned like twice of her taking a bunch of them, but again, there's no consequence to this. Nothing happens because of it. It has no effect on her. Yeah. She then goes back to her room, locks the door, has a nap, only to be woken up by Jeremy later, and I'm like, how the hell did he get in? Told you he was a creep. Turns out he climbed in through the broken window, which is even more creepy, but once again, this is just seen as like, oh, normal and cute, how nice. Nothing ever comes of it. God's sake. Jeremy tells her that he's falling for her, and he feels guilty, but not guilty enough to stop. Drink for another cliche. God's sake. Then he says that he is going to put Verity in a nursing facility. God, you could tell I was tired at this point because my notes just say, petition to change the name of this book to How to Replace Your Wife in 2 Weeks. Then they have sex again, and he finishes in her, so you just know she's gonna get pregnant, right? Because it's what this man does. Lowen reveals, I feel like I'm falling in love with the man, and I've only known him for a few weeks, but I'm not only falling in love with him in real life, I've fallen in love with him because of Verity's words. Everything she revealed about him has given me insight into the kind of person he is. What, controlling and abusive? with anger issues. He deserves better than what she gave him. I want to give him what she never did. He deserves to be with someone who will put her love for his children before anything else. And at this point I was like, yeah, you're doing exactly what Corey did to you. How can you not see that? And again, I thought that would be like a really great thing to examine further and to have her learn something from, but no. They get a happy ending because of it, apparently. It's romantic when she does it. God's sake. Later in the kitchen, Lowen starts to interrogate the kid Crew about whether his mum can talk, and this is so weird. The kid responds by biting down on a butter knife and needing to go to the hospital, and I'm like, this entire family needs intense therapy. All of them. I don't know to this day why he did that, but here we are. While she's alone in the house with Verity, Lowen decides to set up an old baby monitor in her room so that she can watch and see if she moves, and then she goes back to read the very last chapter of Verity's book. In it, Jeremy asks her a lot of questions, and it's clear that he suspects his wife killed Harper. So in response, Verity writes this very manuscript that you're reading and says if Jeremy is going to turn her into the police, she'll drive her car into a tree, and then the book ends there. Lowen is really shocked, and she asks herself, if he truly thought she killed Harper, how could he stand to be in the same house as her? And at this point again, I was like, okay, so like maybe this manuscript is fiction. Maybe this stuff didn't really happen. Maybe it's just like another creative writing exercise, because she's kind of right. But Lowen doesn't question it anymore because Jeremy and Crew come home. Lowen finally sees Verity move on the baby monitor, so crazy woman that she is, goes running upstairs with a knife and screams for Jeremy. Then she assaults Verity. She just full-on assaults this woman who has literally done nothing to her. For all she knows, this is a woman like miraculously waking up from some sort of coma vegetative state thing, and she's just like, oh, I know, I'll run and assault her. I rip the covers off her. Get up, Verity, I saw you. I'm full of rage as I lower the side of her hospital bed. You aren't getting away with this. I want Jeremy to see her for who she really is before she has an opportunity to hurt him, to hurt Crew. I grab her by the ankles and pull on her legs. I have her halfway off the bed when I feel someone... I'm sorry, but like, where's the logic here? Because if she's gonna hurt Jeremy and Crew, surely she would have done it in these last, like, however many months that she's been faking this state, right? I grab her by the ankles and pull on her legs. I have her halfway off the bed when I feel someone rip me from her. I'm swung around and carried to the door. He plants my feet on the floor of the hallway. Jeremy tries to throw Lowen out of the house, understandably, the first decent thing he's done in this book. And Lowen is just like, no, see? She's evil, read her book. And he reads it and she's like, oh, he did that quickly, but then thinks nothing of it. And he cries a lot. He goes to confront Verity, who finally breaks character and is like, I had to. So Jeremy gets angry and Lowen says, he looks like he's about to explode in rage. See, he has anger issues, right? He turns and releases his anger with a fist against the door. It makes Verity flinch. And then he attacks her because, of course, the only solution to what he thinks is violence against his kids is murder and more violence, right? That's healthy. If he really thinks this happened, surely he'd just turn her into the police, but he's like, nope, time to kill her. He grabs her by the leg and yanks her back onto the bed. When she starts to scream, he covers her mouth. They struggle. She's trying to kick him. He's trying to hold her down. Then his other hand forms a circle around her throat. No, Jeremy. I run straight... She's watching this on the baby monitor at first, by the way. I run straight up to Verity's room and stop short when I reach the doorway. Jeremy is on top of her. Her arms are trapped beneath his knees. Her legs are kicking at the bed. Her feet are digging into the mattress as she wheezes. She's trying to fight back, but he overpowers her in every way. Jeremy! I rush to him and try to pull him off her. All I can think of is Crew and Jeremy's future, and how his anger is not worth a life. His life. Jeremy! He isn't listening. He refuses to let her go. I try to get in his face, to calm him, to talk sense into him. You have to stop. You're crushing her windpipe. They'll know you killed her. Jeremy covers her mouth and looks at me. There's a plea in his eyes, but it's not a plea for me to call for help. It's a plea for me to help him figure out a better way to end her. I don't even argue with him. There is not a single cell in her body that deserves to live after all she's done. I step back and try to think. If he chokes her, they'll know. His handprints will be on her throat. Mate, they're already going to be on there. He's already choked her. Anyway. If he smothers her, the particles from the pillow will be in her lungs. But we have to do something. If he doesn't, she'll get away with it somehow because she's manipulative. She'll end up hurting him him or Crew. She'll kill him just like she killed her daughter, just like she tried to kill Harper as an infant. You have to make it look like an accident, I say, my voice quiet, yet loud enough to be heard over the noises she's making beneath the palm of his hand. Make her vomit. See what I said about it coming back? The only thing that pays off, and it's terrible. Cover her nose and mouth until she stops breathing. It'll look like she aspirated in her sleep. Jeremy's eyes are wide as he listens to me, but there's understanding there. He pulls his hand from her mouth, then shoves his fingers down her throat. I turn my head, I can't watch. I hear the gagging and then the choking. It feels like it goes on forever. Forever. So that's it. They kill her. So what I thought was going to happen in the beginning of her like taking over this woman's life and being a stalker has happened, but so much worse. She's literally come along and taken her husband, her home, her job, and now helped him kill her. What the hell? I don't know how they're supposed to like get away with this though, because like Lowen attacked her earlier, Jeremy's attacked her now. They both tried to drag her off the bed and stuff. They've both been like pushing her around. Jeremy's had his hands around her throat. She's gonna have bruising. Like, it's gonna be on there. They're gonna know she was attacked. But apparently they don't, because coroners are stupid, apparently. I said in my notes, I hope they get caught, but no. 7 months pass, everyone believes Verity died in her sleep, and meanwhile, Lowen is pregnant, because of course she is. But, oh, this is disgusting. We're a family now. We aren't made up of all the members of the family Crew was born into, but I know Jeremy is appreciative that Crew has me in his life, and he'll be a big brother soon. I hate this ending. I hate it so much. Lowen, Jeremy, and the kid move out of the house, but just before they do, Lowen finds that Jeremy had a secret hole in the floor of her room where she kept a knife, some photos, and a letter to Jeremy. And it's revealed that Verity's editor made her do a thing called antagonistic journaling. This is the big twist. Are you ready for this? She said I needed to get into the mind of an evil character for her novels by writing journal entries from my own life, things that really happened, but to make my inner dialogue in the journal entry be the opposite from what I was actually thinking at the time. She told me to start by writing about the day you and I met. She said I should write down what I was wearing, where we met, what our conversation was that night, but to make my inner dialogue more sinister than it actually was. It sounded simple, harmless, and it's revealed that Verity's autobiography the entire way through this book was all apparently a fiction, just a writing exercise to help make her novels better. None of this stuff actually happened. The real Verity is sweet and lovely and kind, apparently, but, you know, she didn't actually kill her kid. She didn't try and kill her kid. She actually wanted to have these kids. She didn't try and hurt the babies during her pregnancy. None of that was true. All fiction. All of it. But apparently, Jeremy had found it before and believed it was all real, which is completely understandable because, you know, she wrote in the beginning that it was real. But Jeremy, as always being Jeremy, responds with violence because I told you he's a controlling douchebag and a villain and violent and abusive and he's an awful person. I've been saying this the whole way through, even before it was revealed. And Verity wrote in this letter to him, "The next thing I knew, you were dragging me by the throat to the bedroom. I was no match for your strength as you held my arms down with your knees and squeezed my throat tighter. If you'd given me 5 seconds, just 5 seconds to explain, I could have saved us. I tried so hard to say just let me explain, but I couldn't breathe. I'm not sure what the sequence of events was after that. I know I passed out. Maybe you panicked because you realised you'd almost killed me. If I had died on that bed, you would have been arrested for my murder. Crew wouldn't have a father. I woke up in the passenger seat of my Range Rover and you were behind the wheel. There was tape on my mouth and my hands and feet were bound together. Again, I just wanted to explain that what you read wasn't true, but I couldn't talk. I looked down and realised I didn't have on a seatbelt, and in that moment I knew what you were doing." So Verity pretends to still be ill the entire time after her recovery, after Jeremy tried to kill her twice, because she's afraid of Jeremy and she's trying to like get better enough to take Crew away from him and stuff like that, and she like realizes he's dangerous and she's like, oh, better get away. And then she mocks Jeremy for believing the manuscript is real because do men really believe that women are that obsessed with sex? It was fiction. Of course I loved making love to you, but most of the time it was to please you because that's what couples do for each other. It wasn't because I couldn't live without it. So Colleen Hoover goes from one extreme to the other. Both of them bad. From unbelievable sex-crazed maniac to, ha, don't be silly, women don't actually like sex at all. Which is untrue and ridiculous and it's all just stupid. Colleen Hoover has no healthy attitude to sex. So after finding out that the father of her unborn child is a violent murderer a couple of times over, and that this woman she helped murder was actually completely innocent and fine and nice, Lowen does the repulsive thing. Oh, God's sake. her response is to rip up Verity's letter so no one ever knows. And this is a letter that Jeremy hasn't seen. So by destroying this letter, she allows Jeremy to go on believing that Verity was evil and killed their kid. And they're all awful people. Jeremy's a murderer and he's awful. He's violent and controlling and abusive. Lowen's awful because she's hiding all this and helped kill her and allows Jeremy to go on thinking his ex-wife was evil and killed their kid. Verity actually might be the only decent, innocent one in all this. God's sake. But no, Lowen doesn't agree. Lowen being Lowen says, no matter which way I look at it, it's clear that Verity was a master at manipulating the truth. The only question that remains is, which truth was she manipulating? And so the book ends with Lowen completely insulting Verity, calling her manipulative, blaming her for all of this, and then having completely stolen all of Verity's life and money and accomplishments and husband, rides off into the sunset with him ready to pop out his baby. The end. Oh, for God's sake, this is an awful, dreadful, terrible book and I hate it. And this is the problem I've had with it, that I've been trying to like explain the whole way through without trying to give it away, right? Verity obviously didn't do those awful things. She didn't try and kill her kid. She didn't actually kill a kid. None of that was happening. But, which is why it's hard to talk about those bits knowing they didn't actually happen, but knowing that Colleen Hoover was trying to write a character, writing about herself being the most evil, villainous person she could, you know? She was trying to make this person awful. So Colleen Hoover was like, how do we make this woman the most awful person in the world? Well, clearly we make her a woman who didn't want kids and who tried to force herself to miscarry an unwanted pregnancy. That was Colleen Hoover's idea of the most evil woman she could think of. And that's what bothers me. This book is so anti-choice. This is so forced birth. This is so anti-bodily autonomy and anti-woman and sexist and misogynistic. And it's horrific. Not only are the attitudes towards child-free women and women who need abortions disturbing and disgusting, the attitudes towards women and sex are disturbing and disgusting. The slut-shaming is disturbing and disgusting. There's so much wrong with this book. It is really, really bad. The plot points that don't go anywhere are just ridiculous. The whole thing about, like, is Crew a psychopath who hurt kids or Turtle and all that stuff, it doesn't go anywhere. It's never addressed. It's just nothing. The whole comparisons with Corey never go anywhere. He never turns up again after the first 4 chapters. It's like, what's even the point in him? He doesn't do anything. This whole thing of like Jeremy being worried about the nurse and other people's reactions to him and Lowen's relationship doesn't go anywhere. It's never addressed. It's never discussed. We never see any backlash. Lowen's sleepwalking is never mentioned after that anticlimactic, ooh, they were locked in a bedroom for all of 5 minutes. And Jeremy had to jump out of the ground floor window. Just so many points don't go anywhere. So many things aren't explored. Just none of it. I thought maybe there'd be some interesting parallels drawn between, like, when Verity was writing about this, like, fearing her kid thing. You know, fearing Harper killing Chastin when she had the dream about it, the premonition. I thought there might be some interesting parallels where, like, Lowen was feeling more because she was like, oh, my mother feared me when I was a kid. Verity's fearing her kid, and there'd be some, like, maybe some empathy, some anger, some feelings, some exploration of that. No. There was absolutely nothing. That could have been such an interesting point, and it was just completely ignored and looked over. So, that was Colleen Hoover's Verity. Apparently that is Colleen Hoover's best book according to many, many lists, according to TikTok, according to blogs, according to YouTube videos I've seen, and it was an utter letdown and disappointment, and just very disgusting. There was a lot of unnecessary stuff, there was a lot of shaming stuff, a lot of misogynistic stuff, a lot made me very uncomfortable. Our heroes were awful characters who were never really acknowledged as being awful. Jeremy was clearly controlling, abusive and violent, but he was never labelled as such, even by Lowen, who was like, better let him go on being angry at his wife so I can be happy with him. Lowen is the true villain in all this, but that's never acknowledged because she ends it by being like, no, actually this was all Verity's fault because she was manipulative. And Verity was the only innocent one in this. She suffered for no reason. And at the end, she's still like, claimed to be like, woo, bet she was really a villain when no, oh. This book left me with feelings. It left me exhausted and tired and, for God's sake, I've been talking for so long now. God, it's nearly midnight. That's how long I've been filming. I have no idea how long this video is, so if you've sat through it all, thank you so much. I appreciate you a lot. Yeah, I hope you can all go and read better books than this going forward. But for now, thank you so much for watching today. If you've read this book, please let me know what your thoughts down in the comments below, or if you have any other books like by Colleen Hoover or anyone else that you'd like me to look at and just be a bit snarky about, then please let me know in the comments as well. But for now, thank you for watching. I appreciate your time. Kyra thanks you from her snoring little bed, and we'll see you again really, really soon.